Welcome to Literary Journeys with River. Today, we bring you a summary of Voyager, the third book in Diana Gabaldon's fascinating Outlander series. We'll join Claire and Jamie Fraser on an exciting journey through time and space, facing new challenges in unfamiliar lands. Remember, this is just a summary, not the full book. If you want to immerse yourself in the story, don't hesitate to read the book. Part 1. The Battle and the Loves of Men. Chapter 1. Jamie Fraser, gravely wounded, lies on the battlefield of Culloden amidst a brutal scene of death and destruction. Though he believed he had died, he soon realizes that he is still alive, painfully aware of his surroundings. He is covered in wounds and suffering from a fever, which causes him to constantly drift between reality and hallucinations. As he struggles to stay conscious, Jamie reflects on his situation. He remembers his wife, Claire, and desperately prays for her safety, knowing she might only be secure if she managed to return to her own time, 200 years in the future. The pain in his body is as deep as his emotional despair, and the only company he has in this hell is the corpse of Captain Jack Randall, lying on top of him, adding to his suffering. The arrival of English soldiers interrupts his thoughts. Lord Melton, leading the troop, recognizes Jamie as the infamous Red Jamie, one of the leaders of the Jacobite rebellion. Melton, recalling a promise made by his brother John William Grey, whose life Jamie had spared, finds himself in a moral dilemma about how to proceed with the prisoner. While the English soldiers summarily execute the surviving Scots, Melton struggles with the idea of fulfilling his duty or honoring his family's debt. Jamie, weakened and resigned to his fate, awaits his end. But instead of being executed along with his companions, Melton decides to honor his brother's debt and, in an act of mercy, orders that Jamie be taken to his home in Lallybroch. With a wound that threatens to kill him from infection, Jamie, amid fever and pain, clings to the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he might survive long enough to return to his beloved Claire. Chapter 2. Claire, in a state of great agitation, confronts the possibility that Jamie Fraser, the man she loved and lost, might not have died in the Battle of Culloden as she had always believed. She, along with her daughter Brianna and Roger Wakefield, is frantically searching for answers in Inverness, where history and old documents might offer some clue about Jamie's fate. Roger, exhausted but determined, meticulously reviews the historical records he has been researching for weeks. He shows them a list of officers from the Lovat Regiment who fought at Culloden, among which is the name Jamie Fraser. Upon hearing her father's name read aloud, Brianna feels a mix of disbelief and shock as she recognizes the connection to her past. Claire, devastated but resolute, remembers how Jamie had left her at the stone circle before returning to the battlefield, with the firm intention of rescuing his men or dying in combat. For her, the idea that Jamie could have survived the Culloden massacre seems inconceivable, especially since she knew he would prefer death over surrendering to the English. Roger, however, insists that Jamie might have escaped execution at Culloden, based on an account mentioning an officer from the Lovat Regiment who survived. He carefully analyzes the records, eliminating other known officers who died in the battle, leading him to conclude that the survivor could only be Jamie. The discussion becomes tense as Claire, overwhelmed by the possibility that Jamie survived, faces the painful reality that even if he did, 200 years have passed, and he must be dead by now. Brianna, trying to console her mother, also struggles to process this new and bewildering information about her biological father, a man she never knew but feels intensely connected to through her mother's stories. Roger, driven by his historian's instinct and the desire to give Brianna and Claire the answers they need, offers to continue the search to discover what really happened to Jamie after Culloden. The possibility of finding the truth is something Claire cannot ignore. With a barely audible whisper, she asks Roger to keep investigating, hoping to find some trace of Jamie Fraser in history. Chapter 3. Claire and Roger walk across the bridge over the River Ness in Inverness, their thoughts consumed by the ongoing search for Jamie Fraser. Claire, overwhelmed by uncertainty, doesn't know what would be worse, discovering that Jamie died at Culloden or that he survived only to face an unknown fate. Roger, ever ready to help, shields her from the crowd crossing the bridge as their conversations reflect the tension they both feel. Back at the house, Claire and Roger immerse themselves in their work, poring over books and documents that might contain clues about Jamie's whereabouts after Culloden. Roger demonstrates his skill as a historian, searching for information about a Jacobite officer who might have escaped execution. Claire, meanwhile, recalls how Frank, her first husband, tried to understand her incredible story about time travel, though he initially thought she was mad. This revelation brings back painful memories of Claire's return to the present, pregnant with Jamie's child and trapped in a marriage that could never be the same. Claire remembers how Frank tried to accept the situation, even moving with her to Boston to start anew. Through flashbacks, the complexity of her relationship with Frank is revealed, a man who, though decent and kind, could never fully grasp the truth of what Claire had experienced. The arrival of Brianna, Jamie's daughter, brought with it a mixture of joy and pain, and though Frank tried to accept the child, his marriage to Claire never regained the closeness they once had. As Claire faces these memories, Brianna returns home after spending the afternoon researching at the clan's office. Excitedly, she presents a new lead to her mother and Roger, a Highland legend about a Jacobite known as the Dunbonnet, who survived Culloden and hid for years in a cave near his estate. Brianna, using her intuition and the knowledge she has acquired about her father, deduces that this man could be Jamie, who would have hidden his distinctive red hair under a bonnet to avoid being recognized. The connection between the legend and reality seems plausible, and Brianna's enthusiasm is evident as she shows a map placing the Leap of the Cask near Lallybroch, the Fraser estate. Claire and Roger, impressed by Brianna's insight, recognize that they have taken a significant step in their search. As the night progresses, the three of them feel the proximity of the truth about Jamie Fraser, awakening both hope and fear in their hearts. Part 2. Lallybroch. Chapter 4. In November 1752, Jamie Fraser leads a hidden and dangerous life at Lallybroch, where once a month he descends from his cave hideout to shave and maintain a small semblance of civilization. These nocturnal visits to the family home are brief, filled with silences and gestures laden with meaning, as Jamie grapples with the reality of his isolation. Upon arrival, Ian or Jenny greet him with a smile or a kiss and prepare a bowl of hot water and a sharp razor so he can shave and, in doing so, regain a part of his lost humanity. During these moments of transition, Jamie struggles with the difficulty of reintegrating into family life after weeks of solitude and danger in the wilderness. Words come hard to him at first, so he prefers to listen to the news about the English patrols and the political situation in Edinburgh and London. However, what truly matters to him are the updates on the estate and his family, especially the children, who adore him and see him as a near-mythical figure, a hero defying the oppressive forces. During one of these visits, Jamie converses with the children, particularly his nephew, young Jamie, who is beginning to take on the responsibility of being the man of the house in his father's absence. Ian, Jenny's husband, has been arrested again under suspicion of being a Jacobite, leaving Jamie worried about his family's well-being. Though Jenny tries to reassure him that Ian will be released soon, the situation is tense, and the memories of friends and neighbors who have been executed by the English weigh heavily on their minds. Jamie strives to keep morale high, sharing a story about Adam and the beard with the children, who watch him shave with fascination. To them, Jamie embodies adventure and courage, though he knows he faces a constant battle against loneliness and the danger of losing himself in his own isolation. In the cave, where he spends most of his time, Jamie has become a creature of the wilderness, with sharpened senses and a deep connection to nature. During one of his nocturnal hunts, he manages to bring down a deer, offering a brief prayer of thanks before skinning and carrying the animal back to the house. This wild and dangerous life has divided him into two, a nocturnal beast that hunts and survives, and a man who, upon reaching Lallybroch, tries to regain his humanity and connect with his family. Arriving at the house always brings a mix of relief and melancholy. Seeing the lights of Lallybroch, Jamie allows the mask of the Dunbonnet to fade, letting himself be enveloped by the warmth and familiarity of home, if only for a brief moment, before returning to his shadowy and perilous existence.
Chapter 5.
3 weeks after Ian's disappearance, Jamie Fraser, consumed by worry, decides to descend early from his cave refuge. After days without word from his family, he fears for their safety and the lack of food. The atmosphere in Lallybroch is eerily quiet when he arrives. Upon entering, he finds his sister Jenny alone in the kitchen, struggling with her pregnancy and the management of the household, now without the help of Mrs. Coker, who had recently passed away. Jenny, always strong and resilient, welcomes her brother with affection but also with the contained sadness of the recent loss of the old housekeeper. Jenny and Jamie prepare dinner together, a hare pie, as they discuss the situation they find themselves in. Ian is still imprisoned, and the English continue to patrol the region, increasing the tension at home. Jamie, aware of the risk he runs by approaching the house, cannot resist the need to protect and help his sister, even though Jenny insists he stay away, especially during the imminent birth. Jamie, stubborn and concerned, assures her he will be there when the time comes, ignoring the dangers. The day of the birth arrives 3 days later, and Jamie, true to his promise, runs down to the house. However, Fergus, the young boy under Jamie's care, warns him of the presence of English soldiers nearby. Despite the warnings, Jamie cannot stay away, knowing Jenny is about to give birth. Upon reaching Lallybroch, he finds the house in chaos. The animals are unattended, the children are nervous, and Mrs. Kirby is trying to maintain calm by reading the Bible. Finally, Jenny gives birth to a son, a new Ian, while Jamie stays close, unable to help in any other way than with his presence. The moment of tranquility following the birth is abruptly shattered when English dragoons burst into the house, alerted by a shot Jamie had fired to scare away some crows, which he saw as a bad omen. The English captain, suspicious and arrogant, interrogates Jenny, who, despite her weakened state, remains calm and pretends the baby was born dead, a lie meant to protect the newborn. In the midst of the chaos, Jamie hides in a cupboard with the baby, struggling to keep him quiet. Young Jamie, Jenny's eldest son, bravely defends his family in front of the English captain, managing to make the soldier leave. Once safe, Jamie emerges from hiding and hands the baby to Jenny, knowing that his presence now poses too great a risk to the family. Before returning to his refuge, Jamie bitterly reflects on his inability to protect his family, feeling as powerless now as he did when he lost Claire. Finally, he decides that, for the good of all, he must stay away from Lallybroch for a while, despite the pain this causes him. The scene closes with Jenny nodding silently, understanding her brother's need to protect them, even at the cost of his own suffering. Chapter 6. Jamie Fraser remained hidden in the cave for 2 months, avoiding the English soldiers who patrolled the region and devastated everything in their path. The constant danger forced him to live in a state of perpetual alertness, venturing out only on the safest nights to hunt or fetch water. His isolation was complete, interrupted only by the occasional whistles of Rabbi McNabb, who brought news of the family. One day, while Jamie was reading at the cave's entrance, his attention was drawn to the appearance of a group of English soldiers on the path below the cave. To his horror, he saw the soldiers surround Fergus, who was carrying a small keg of beer. Watching from his hiding place, Jamie saw how Fergus refused to give up the keg to the soldiers, provoking their anger. Though Fergus tried to escape, the soldiers caught him. Jamie, immobilized and desperate, witnessed the moment when one of the soldiers drew his saber and struck Fergus, severing his hand in one blow. The barrel rolled down the hill, and silence fell as Fergus lay wounded on the ground. Jamie, powerless, had to wait 2 days before he could descend to the house. Upon arrival, he found Fergus in the children's room, recovering from the amputation. Though the boy was visibly weakened, he remained spirited and reminded Jamie of the agreement they had made in Paris. If Fergus lost a hand or an ear while in Jamie's service, Jamie would provide for him for the rest of his life. Deeply affected by Fergus's loyalty, Jamie assured him that he would keep his promise. Later, Jamie took Jenny to a hiding place in the house known as the Priest's Hole, where he confessed that he could no longer stay hidden in the cave and planned to surrender to the English. He believed that, even if captured, he would not be executed, based on what Claire had told him about the future. Horrified, Jenny tried to dissuade him, but Jamie explained that he would allow someone to betray him so the reward could be claimed and used to benefit Lallybroch. After 2 months of planning, when everything was ready, Mary McNabb, the maid, was sent by Jenny to the cave. Aware of the deep loneliness and pain-consuming Jamie, she offered to comfort him in a way his sister and the children could not. Jamie, initially reluctant and overwhelmed by emotional conflict, resisted, remembering his love for Claire. However, Mary, with unusual empathy, explained that she did not intend to replace that love, but to offer him solace and relieve his burden as much as possible. Though uncertain and feeling vulnerable, Jamie eventually accepted Mary's gesture. He knew what she offered was an act of generosity and care, something different from what he had with Claire but equally valuable in his situation. With a renewed sense of reality and the need to move forward, Jamie allowed himself to accept the comfort Mary provided, recognizing the kindness and sacrifice behind her gesture. Part 3. When I Am Your Captive. Chapter 7. In Inverness, on May 25th, 1968, the envelope from Linklater arrived with a set of documents promising new clues. Brianna, excitedly, and Roger, cautiously, opened the package, discovering a private journal that narrated the strange story of James Fraser, a survivor of the Battle of Culloden. This account suggested that despite a severe wound, Fraser had been sent back to his estate with little chance of survival. However, Brianna's conviction that Jamie had returned home was unwavering, and her faith was reinforced when Fiona, the young housekeeper, told the story of the Dunbonnet. According to the legend passed down by Fiona's grandmother, the Dunbonnet was a man who, after escaping Culloden, hid for 7 years in a cave, protected by his tenants. In a desperate act to save his people from starvation, he devised a bold plan: to allow one of his tenants to betray him so the reward offered for his head could feed his people. Eventually, he was imprisoned but not executed, allowing his tenants to survive thanks to the gold obtained. This story filled Roger with hope, as it meant that Jamie might be recorded in some official English prison document, allowing them to trace his fate. The search continued through piles of papers and historical records in the cluttered study of the late Reverend Wakefield. Roger, Brianna, and Claire's perseverance led them to meticulously review every document, hoping to find a definitive clue about Jamie's whereabouts. During these long days of research, Roger and Claire reflected on their own paths in life. Roger, raised in an academic environment, realized how history had shaped his life, while Claire shared how her vocation as a doctor had arisen from her previous experience in the 18th century. The conversation turned personal, revealing the difficulties and sacrifices Claire had faced, including her decision to study medicine while raising Brianna, with Frank's unexpected support. Finally, after days of searching, Claire found Jamie Fraser's name in a prison record. Though she almost overlooked it at first, reading just Mackenzie Fraser of Brock Toorak made her heart race. She had found the proof she so desperately sought. The record belonged to Ardsmuir Prison, and though Claire did not know where that place was, she felt she was closer to discovering Jamie's final fate. Chapter 8. In February 1755, young Commander John William Gray assumed his new post at Ardsmuir, a remote prison in Scotland. His predecessor, Colonel Harry Quarry, greeted him with bitter irony, highlighting the harshness of the place and the monotony of life in the prison. Quarry, eager to return to London, left Gray with a list of duties and warnings, the most important being to keep the prisoners, mostly Jacobites, under control, defeated and exhausted after the Battle of Culloden. Gray discovered that most of the prisoners were obedient, though they were known for their stubbornness. Quarry mentioned that the prisoners' leader was Jamie Fraser, known as Red Jamie or Mac Dub, who had great influence over the other inmates. Aware of Fraser's reputation, Quarry advised Gray to dine with him regularly to maintain a good relationship and avoid trouble. Though Gray was reluctant to follow this advice, Quarry's warning about Fraser's danger left him thoughtful. Meanwhile, the prisoners discussed the new warden. Meadow Lindsay, Kenny Leslie, and other prisoners tried to predict what the relationship with Gray would be like, comparing him to his predecessors. Jamie Fraser, known among his own as Mac Dub, listened attentively, aware that the new warden's attitude could affect life in the prison. Despite his fatigue after a long day of work, Fraser maintained his role as leader, ensuring that the prisoners' problems, such as rat bites, were addressed. That night, Gray wrote a letter to his mother, trying to conceal the discomfort he felt in his new surroundings. Reflecting on his past, he thought of the humiliation he suffered 10 years earlier during the Battle of Prestonpans, when he tried to capture Jamie Fraser and was defeated by him, making him the object of ridicule among his comrades. The encounter with Fraser had deeply marked Gray, and now, having Fraser as a prisoner under his command, he found himself torn between his desire for revenge and his sense of honor. The next morning, Gray decided to keep a distant relationship with Fraser, aware that although he now had the power, his duty as a British officer prevented him from taking advantage of the situation. However, the reality of life at Ardsmuir quickly forced him to confront the practical difficulties of his new role. Discovering that rats infested both the cells and his own office, he ordered cats to be brought in to control the plague, only to discover that the prisoners, in their desperation, sometimes hunted and ate rats to survive. Gray's arrival at Ardsmuir and his inevitable encounter with Jamie Fraser marked the beginning of a tense coexistence between the commander and his prisoner, both trapped in a game of power and honor that would play out in the cold and damp landscape of Scotland. Chapter 9. John William Gray's determination to keep his distance from Jamie Fraser was shattered when a messenger arrived with news that forced him to reconsider. A man had been found wandering the moor near the village of Ardsmuir, delirious and mentioning gold, French, and Gaelic, a combination that immediately aroused Gray's suspicion about the mythical French gold, a treasure supposedly sent by Louis of France to support Charles Stuart in his failed Jacobite uprising. Aware that the prisoner Jamie Fraser was the only one who could understand both Gaelic and French, Gray was forced to ask for his help. Although Fraser initially refused, Gray eventually persuaded him by offering to remove his chains if he agreed to interpret the man's words. Fraser reluctantly accepted, and together they headed to the village to interrogate the dying man. At the Lime Tree Inn, Fraser showed surprising tenderness as he comforted the vagabond while he mumbled on his deathbed. However, the man's words turned out to be incoherent and mostly nonsensical, mentioning strange things like a white witch and seals, leaving Gray frustrated and without clues about the whereabouts of the gold. The return to the prison was silent and tense. Fraser collected watercress along the way, explaining that it helped prevent scurvy, a knowledge he had learned from his wife, leading Gray to ask about her. Fraser's response was cold and painful. "My wife is gone," hinting at deep sadness and resentment. 3 days later, Fraser escaped from the prison, an act that, though not surprising, ignited a mix of anger and duty in Gray. Gray personally led the search, combing the moor and coast in a desperate attempt to capture Fraser and perhaps find the French gold. However, the search was unsuccessful. In a moment of personal need, while Gray stepped aside to attend to a private matter, he found himself face to face with Fraser. Both men, surprised, stared at each other in silence, aware of the paradoxical situation in which they found themselves. With a mix of bitter humor and resignation, Fraser acknowledged that despite the apparent disadvantage, they were once again evenly matched. Chapter 10. Jamie Fraser was alone in the cold storage of the prison, shivering as he clung to his knees, trying in vain to warm himself. The days following his failed escape filled him with uncertainty and fear, especially at the prospect of being chained again. As he murmured prayers, his mind returned to recent events, to the words of the dying Duncan Kerr, and to the secret he had kept even from his new jailer, Commander Gray. Kerr, a man Jamie recognized despite his deteriorated state, had raved about a cursed gold supposedly delivered by a white witch for Prince Charles Stuart. Aware that every word could have serious implications, Jamie had warned him to speak carefully. Kerr's words about the witch, referring to someone seeking a brave man, made Jamie think of his own wife, Claire, who at one time had been called the White Lady. However, When Gray had interrogated him, Jamie only conveyed what was necessary, without mentioning that he understood what Kerr was saying. And though he was faithful to the agreement with Gray, he did not reveal that upon hearing about the White Witch, he had decided to escape to find answers, following the trail of the dying man's words to an altar of Saint Bride, the White Lady of Tradition. There he found a treasure, but in his desolation, he threw it into the sea, feeling that it belonged neither to him nor to King George. Gray, however, was not satisfied with Jamie's silence. The tension between them grew when the commander confronted him again in his quarters, insisting on knowing why he had escaped and why he had returned. Jamie, firm in his decision to protect the secret, faced the commander with dignity, though without revealing anything that could compromise himself or his family. The relationship between Gray and Fraser became a subtle battle of wills, a game in which both measured their words and actions. Gray, determined to unravel the mystery of the gold, invited Jamie to dine in his quarters, attempting to establish a more personal connection to obtain the truth. The dinner became a weekly routine where the two men discussed literature and general topics, carefully avoiding the true purpose of their interaction. But the night Gray finally broached the subject of Jamie's family, mentioning his sister and nephews, the tension reached its peak. Gray hinted that if he did not get answers, he could send the dragoons to Lallybroch, the Fraser home. The threat made Jamie, caught between his sense of honor and the desire to protect his family, reveal the truth about what he had found at the altar of Saint Bride, a small box with gold coins and some jewels. However, to Gray's dismay, Jamie confessed that he had thrown the treasure into the sea, at a place known as the Devil's Cauldron. He had only kept one stone, a sapphire of deep blue, which he used as proof of the treasure's existence, but which held no further value for him. Fraser explained that he had done so to prevent the treasure from falling into King George's hands, but that he had no intention of benefiting from it. In the end, Gray accepted the explanation with resignation, though unable to hide his frustration. Fraser swore on the Bible that the treasure now rested at the bottom of the sea, sealing his testimony with a solemnity that Gray, despite everything, was forced to respect. Chapter 11. The matter of the French gold no longer loomed over them, and Jamie Fraser and Commander John Gray returned to their usual routine, a brief formal exchange about the prisoners, followed by lighter conversations and, at times, a game of chess. On that particular evening, the discussion centered around Pamela, Samuel Richardson's novel, and its length. Fraser defended its length, noting that during his time hiding in a cave in the Highlands, he had relied on a few books to maintain his sanity. He preferred, therefore, large volumes that would last him months. After discussing the novel, Gray suggested a game of chess. Though he knew Fraser was a more skilled player, that night he decided to try a risky tactic, the Torremolinos Gambit. The tension grew on the board, with each move carefully calculated and observed. When Gray finally executed his strategy, he realized he had managed to surprise Fraser, who made a respectful comment, admiring the warden's cunning. However, the atmosphere changed drastically when Fraser, in a casual tone, mentioned that he had met Gray's brother, Lord Melton, at the Battle of Culloden. Gray, caught off guard, couldn't help but feel a mix of discomfort and tension. Fraser recalled how Melton, in a stubborn act of compassion, had refused to shoot him, a gesture he hadn't appreciated at the time, as he had wished to die. The conversation took a more personal turn when Gray shared his own experience at Culloden, where he lost a close friend, Hector. The pain of that loss, still vivid in his memory, led him to remember his brother's insistence that he face the reality of Hector's death. Fraser, in a silent gesture of respect, did not interrupt, but his empathy was evident when he raised his glass in acknowledgement. Both men, trapped in their memories, shared a moment of vulnerability, though in silence. Fraser thanked Gray for his humanity during an earlier encounter in the forest of Carrierick, where, despite being overwhelmed by fear, Gray had tried to protect Claire, Fraser's wife, unaware that she was not in danger. Fraser's gratitude was genuine, and Gray, though surprised, accepted the thanks with a mix of humility and regret. That night, Fraser returned to his cell with a mix of emotions, recalling his wife in a dream so vivid it nearly pained him. The reality of his loneliness hit him hard when he woke, sweating and with his heart racing. Later, Gray, who had carefully prepared for another dinner with Fraser, was nervous. He knew that what he planned to do was risky, but the attraction he felt for Fraser had consumed him completely. During the chess game, he couldn't help but notice every detail of his guest, from the glint in his eyes to the texture of his hair. The climax came when, unable to resist any longer, Gray reached out and touched Fraser's hand. The contact was like a spark, but not in the way Gray had imagined. Fraser, in a soft but threatening tone, ordered him to withdraw his hand if he didn't want to die. The revulsion and hatred in Fraser's eyes were evident, leaving Gray petrified. Slowly, he withdrew his hand, realizing the gravity of his mistake. The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Fraser stood up and left the room without a word, leaving Gray alone, crushed by the weight of what he had done. Chapter 12. A persistent, cold rain fell over the courtyard of Ardsmere, where the prisoners, hunched and soaked, waited under the watchful eyes of the soldiers. Commander John Gray, sheltered under a roof overhang, observed the scene with resignation. It wasn't the best day for inspecting and cleaning the cells, but the task was necessary to prevent the spread of disease among the more than 200 prisoners. The inmates selected for cleaning emerged from the main cell, escorted by guards. Corporal Dunstable, in charge of the inspection, approached Gray, showing the confiscated possessions, insignificant items, except for a small fragment of Scottish tartan. The possession of tartan was prohibited by the Dress Act, a measure intended to disarm the Scots and suppress their culture. Gray, holding the fragment in his hand, directed his gaze toward the prisoners, searching for the culprit. Soon his eyes settled on a young man named Angus Mackenzie, whose expression was too controlled, too forced. However, before the young man could respond, a firm voice interrupted, claiming responsibility. It was Jamie Fraser. Fraser, with a calmness that contradicted the gravity of the situation, took the piece of cloth, asserting that it belonged to his clan, his mother's, the Mackenzies. Gray, despite knowing Fraser was lying, had no choice but to enforce the punishment stipulated by law. The scene in the courtyard was brutal. Jamie Fraser, stripped to the waist, was tied to the whipping post under the rain. The sergeant assigned to the task wasted no time, and the lashes began to fall, each one announced by the sound of the whip and the mechanical counting of Sergeant Grissom. Gray, outwardly unflinching, watched the punishment while the sound of flesh being struck resonated in the damp air. Fraser's torment continued until his back was shredded, but not a single complaint escaped his mouth. His endurance, though impressive, could not prevent the force of the lashes from leaving him on the brink of collapse. Gray, unable to bear the sight any longer, vomited in his office, tormented by the memory of what had occurred. Later, Fraser was taken to his cell, where Morrison, a prisoner with healing skills, tended to him. He applied hot poultices to his back, while Fraser, in a state of semi-consciousness, endured the pain in silence. Morrison, recognizing the severity of the wounds, offered him whiskey to ease the suffering, but Fraser, with iron determination, initially refused, giving in only to his companion's insistence. As Fraser lay on the floor, he noticed a sound in the corner of the cell, muffled thuds and murmurs. Morrison tried to distract him, but Fraser understood what was happening. Angus Mackenzie was being punished by the prisoners, a reprisal for allowing Fraser to take the blame for him. However, Fraser, weakened and in pain, could do nothing to intervene. Finally, Angus, wounded and sobbing, approached Fraser to apologize. Fraser, with the little strength he had left, consoled him, acknowledging that he too was paying a price. Both shared a moment of understanding, united by suffering and sacrifice. That night, as Fraser reflected in his exhaustion, thoughts of his wife, Claire, and the fate that had led him to lead these men overwhelmed him. Despite the physical pain, he felt a strange release, a deep understanding of the burden he had carried and the sacrifice he had made. In his mind, he forgave those who had betrayed him, and even John Gray, who unknowingly had restored his sense of purpose. For the first time in a long while, Fraser felt at peace. Chapter 13. Roger woke early in Inverness and, noticing the soft morning light filtering through the windows, decided to check the study. When he opened the door, he found Claire asleep on the couch, wrapped in a fireplace rug that barely covered her shoulders. The floor was scattered with papers, as if they had fallen from a folder. Roger approached silently, careful not to wake her. Claire was deeply asleep, her body relaxed and warm to the touch. Roger noticed she was clutching a crumpled piece of paper to her chest. Very gently, he slid the sheet from her hand, and upon reading the name written on it, he felt a pang of emotion. James Mackenzie Fraser, he murmured to himself, impressed by the devotion Claire still felt for this man, whom he barely knew through the stories and documents they had investigated together. Roger realized in that moment that Jamie Fraser must have been an extraordinary person to have left such a deep mark on Claire. With unexpected tenderness, he recovered Claire with the rug and ensured she was comfortable. Then, he began gathering the papers scattered across the floor, all related to Ardsmuir, the prison where Jamie had been held. Although he hadn't yet found Jamie Fraser's final fate, Roger knew that the records from Ardsmuir contained crucial clues. He was determined to continue investigating, even if it meant another visit to the Highland Archives or a trip to London. The important thing was that he had found the next link in the chain. As he left the study, careful not to make any noise, he encountered Brianna coming down the stairs. She looked at him curiously, one eyebrow raised, waiting for news. Roger lifted the folder with a triumphant smile and whispered, "We've got it." Brianna needed no more words. Her face lit up with a radiant smile, sharing the excitement of having taken another step in the search for the man who meant so much to her mother. Part 4. The Lake District. Chapter 14. In September 1756, Jamie Fraser found himself in the Lake District, England, after a tortuous journey with John William Grey. Grey, aware of the danger Jamie faced due to his association with Charles Stuart, suggested he change his name to avoid trouble with Lord Dunsany, who had lost his son in the Battle of Prestonpans. Jamie, however, remained in unperturbed silence. The journey to Hellwater was not easy for Jamie. The sense of temporary freedom, combined with the certainty of his uncertain fate, caused him deep unease. Grey explained that Ardsmuir's restoration had been completed and that the Scottish prisoners would be sent to the American colonies as servants. Although Jamie would not be one of them, given his status as a convicted traitor, which would keep him in England under Grey's constant supervision. Jamie learned that his destination was Hellwater, where he would work as a servant in the house of Lord Dunsany. Although he feared what awaited him, he would soon discover that Hellwater, while not his home, offered him air, light, and the opportunity to work with horses, something that brought him a certain peace of mind. Upon arriving at Hellwater, Jamie assumed his new role as a groom under the name Alex Mackenzie. His presence raised suspicion among the servants, but his imposing physique and reserved character ensured him a solitary but respected existence. Despite his routine life, the presence of Lady Geneva Dunsany, a capricious and headstrong young woman, soon became a constant annoyance for Jamie. Geneva, accustomed to getting what she wanted, became infatuated with Jamie and, despite his initial resistance, managed to manipulate him into yielding to her desires. Using a letter from Jenny, Jamie's sister, as a means of blackmail, Geneva forced Jamie to sleep with her. Although Jamie tried to maintain control of the situation, the experience was difficult for both of them, especially for Geneva, who was completely ignorant of what the act entailed. After fulfilling what Geneva demanded, Jamie, exhausted and emotionally affected, tried to distance himself from the young woman, explaining to her that what she felt was not true love, but a simple physical reaction. With this, Jamie tried to close the episode and return to his life of servitude at Hellwater, knowing that, although he had fulfilled his part of the deal, the consequences of that night might be more lasting than he desired. Chapter 15. In January 1758, Hellwater was engulfed in a violent storm when Jamie Fraser received an unexpected order. He was to prepare the carriage for an urgent trip to Ellesmere. Under the torrential rain, Jamie and the other servants struggled against the elements, unsure of what tragedy had triggered such haste. Jamie's concern grew, fearing the urgency was related to the imminent birth of Geneva Dunsany's child. Upon arriving at Ellesmere, Jamie learned the terrible news. Geneva had died shortly after giving birth to a healthy boy. The sudden death of the young woman left the Dunsany family in a state of deep grief and shock. While Jamie and the coachman Jeffries took refuge in the kitchen, they overheard rumors about the circumstances of Geneva's death and the Earl of Ellesmere's suspicions regarding the child's paternity. The situation at Ellesmere became even tenser when the Earl, drunk and enraged, accused the Dunsany family of deception, claiming the child was not his. The confrontation between the Earl and Lord Dunsany escalated to the point of becoming a physical altercation, forcing Jamie to intervene. However, the situation turned critical when Ellesmere, in a fit of desperation, threatened to throw the child out the window. Acting on instinct, Jamie fired a pistol, managing to stop the Earl before he could carry out his threat. Ellesmere died instantly, and Jamie, trembling, held the child in his arms, knowing he had saved his son but was trapped in an internal conflict. The Earl's death was declared an accident by the inquest, freeing Jamie of any legal guilt. Shortly after, Lady Dunsany approached Jamie with an unexpected offer. He could return to Scotland if he wished, thanks to the Grey family's influence. However, Jamie, aware that his son would grow up at Hellwater, decided to stay, despite the promise of freedom. Hellwater, which had once been a place of confinement, now became his voluntary prison, tied to his decision to remain close to his son. Chapter 16. For Jamie Fraser, the years that followed were surprisingly happy, even comparable to those of his marriage. At Hellwater, he enjoyed a quiet life, with enough food, clothing, and occasional contact with his family in Scotland through discreet letters. He also renewed his peculiar friendship with Lord John Grey, who visited every 3 months as he had promised, and with whom he shared conversations in the stables that offered him a connection to the outside world. However, the greatest source of joy for Jamie at Hellwater was Willie, the son Geneva had left behind after her death. Willie, a strong and charming child, grew up surrounded by love and attention on the estate. His grandfather introduced him to horseback riding from a very young age, and by the age of 3, he was already riding alone, always under Jamie's watchful eye, who ensured the boy received a strict but affectionate education. As Willie grew, Jamie began to worry about the growing physical resemblance between them. Although Jamie had tried to ignore it, it was evident that Willie was starting to look a lot like him, and this similarity did not go unnoticed by others. A comment made by a guest, Lady Grosjew, highlighted that others also noticed the resemblance, leading Jamie to make the difficult decision to speak with Lady Dunsany and plan his departure from Hellwater. When the time came to leave, Jamie prepared to say goodbye to Willie. He informed the boy that he would be leaving, which prompted a desperate reaction from the young Earl. Willie, accustomed to getting his way, could not accept the idea of Jamie leaving. Despite Willie's tantrums and demands, Jamie remained firm, knowing it was best for both of them. Before leaving, Jamie took Willie to his room, where he showed him a small statue of the Virgin Mary and explained the significance of candles and prayers in the Catholic tradition. Moved by the deep connection he felt with his son, Jamie performed an impromptu baptism, giving Willie the name James, like his own. He also gave him his beechwood rosary as a symbol of his love and a way for Willie to always remember him. Willie, excited and solemn, promised not to reveal his new name or newly acquired faith to anyone. The farewell was painful for both, but Jamie, with a heavy heart, assured Willie he would never forget him, carrying the memory of his son with him as he left Hellwater, aware that he had left a part of his soul at the estate. Chapter 17. In August 1968, Claire, Brianna, and Roger were enjoying a moment of tranquility at Loch Ness. After weeks of searching through historical records, they had finally found clear evidence of Jamie Fraser's fate. In the calm of the lake, the three allowed themselves a breather, enjoying the fresh air and the sun they had so missed. The investigation had revealed that Jamie was not sent to America with other Jacobite prisoners, but was transferred to Hellwater under supervised release. This discovery was a relief for Claire, who remembered Jamie suffered terribly from seasickness. With the clue of Jamie's release in 1764, Claire and Roger realized that if she attempted to return through the stones, she might reunite with him, as if the dates aligned. She could arrive in 1766, only 2 years after Jamie's last trace. As they strolled along the lake, Brianna, exhausted from the long nights of research, fell asleep in the boat, leaving Claire and Roger to talk. Claire, her gaze lost in the dark waters, mentioned the existence of the Loch Ness Monster, recalling having seen something similar to a plesiosaur years ago. This mention led to a speculative conversation about the possibility that stone circles like Cray Na Dun were portals to other times, explaining the appearance of the monster in the lake. The conversation turned more serious when Roger asked Claire if she would really try to return to Jamie if they found him. Claire, still undecided, acknowledged the fear and pain that crossing through the stone circle again would entail, a process she described as indescribably horrible. However, the possibility of reuniting with Jamie weighed heavily on her mind. Roger, recalling his experience of hearing the stones and what he had witnessed with Gillian Edgars, understood Claire's fear. As they talked, they both recognized that despite the risks, they would do anything to protect those they loved. This bond of mutual understanding solidified the decision they both knew they would eventually face. If Claire decided to go back to search for Jamie, she would, and Roger, in his heart, knew he would do the same for Brianna. Part 5. You Can't Go Home Again. Chapter 18. In September 1968, Claire found herself trapped on a flight back to Boston, with mixed feelings and scattered thoughts. The trip forced her to leave Roger and Brianna behind, who continued the search for Jamie Fraser in Scotland, while she returned to her life in the United States, uncertain about what awaited her. Claire reflected on her decision to return to Boston, a decision driven more by the need to attend to her responsibilities at the hospital than by true conviction. She knew she had to face everyday obligations, like bills and work, but she also needed to speak with her friend Joseph Abernathy before making a final decision about her future. Memories of her friendship with Joe flooded her during the flight. She remembered how they had met during their professional training at Boston General, where both stood out for being different. Claire, the only woman among the trainee doctors, and Joe, the only black doctor. One day, after performing her first appendectomy unaided, Claire had found herself in the break room with a romance novel that had fallen to the floor, initiating an unexpected conversation with Joe, who confessed that he too enjoyed such books to escape the harsh reality of medicine. Over the years, Joe had become one of Claire's closest friends, sharing with her not only a passion for medicine but also a deep understanding of the challenges they faced as professionals and people. Claire trusted him as she trusted few others, knowing that Joe not only understood her professional life, but also the emotional complexities that came with it. As the plane moved toward New York, Claire tried to ignore the thoughts of Jamie that constantly assaulted her. She knew that her return to Boston did not mean the end of the search for her husband in the past, but she was not yet ready to decide whether she would try to cross through the stone circle again. An imaginary whisper in her ear, a slight brush on her cheek that mixed the smell of the plane with the scent of wool and heather, made her remember Jamie once more. Although she tried to focus on what awaited her in Boston, her mind kept returning to Scotland and the possibility of a reunion with the man she had left behind in another time. Chapter 19. Claire had finally returned to her home on Fury Street, where she had lived for nearly 2 decades with Frank and Brianna. The house, once a lively refuge, now seemed neglected and empty, with withered azaleas at the entrance and an overall air of abandonment. As she watered the plants, she allowed herself a moment of irritation, realizing how much her life had changed and how much she had neglected things since Frank's death. After a hot shower, Claire reflected on her return to modern life and how it felt to be surrounded by the comforts and machines that defined her current world again. She wondered if she really cared about those luxuries and if she could live without them, given that her upbringing with her Uncle Lamb had prepared her for a life without modern conveniences. However, the real dilemma that troubled her wasn't life without technology but life without the people she loved, Brianna, Jamie, and, on some level, Frank. Later, as Claire prepared for bed, memories of Frank returned to her mind, especially of the last night they had spent together in that same bed. On a cold January night, Frank had confessed that he planned to go to England, taking Brianna with him. The revelation sparked a bitter argument in which Claire and Frank confronted uncomfortable truths about their marriage and the love they once shared. Frank admitted that he had had several lovers over the years, something Claire already knew but had never openly confronted. However, what really shook Claire was the revelation that Frank was sterile, something he had discovered years ago, and that, despite everything, he considered Brianna as his daughter, the only one he would ever have. Throughout the argument, it became clear that Frank had never been able to overcome the fact that Brianna was Jamie's daughter and that Claire had never stopped loving her first husband. That same night, Frank left the house and, in a cruel irony, died in a car accident. Claire learned of his death at the hospital where she worked, and for the first time in a long while, she cried for Frank, acknowledging the pain and loss she had felt but had never fully expressed. Back in the present, Claire symbolically said goodbye to Frank one last time before receiving a telegram from Roger that shook her deeply. "We found him. Stop. Come back if you can. Stop. Roger." The telegram, though brief, brought with it a whirlwind of emotions and decisions. Claire stared at it for a long time, aware that the moment had come to make a crucial decision about her future. Chapter 20. Claire visited her former colleague and friend, Joe Abernathy, who was in his office, looking with interest at a business card belonging to his son, Lenny, who now called himself Mohammed Ismail Shabazz III. Joe explained, both amused and irritated, that his son was determined to reclaim his African heritage, even if it meant inventing a lineage. Claire, laughing, shared with Joe the typical concerns of a parent, though hers were more complex due to her situation with Brianna. As they chatted, Joe received a visit from a chubby young man, Horace Thompson, from Harvard's anthropology department, who brought a skeleton for Joe to examine. Joe, always looking for a good opportunity to challenge Claire, handed her the skull and asked her to make a diagnosis. Claire, holding the skull, felt a sudden and deep sadness and intuitively knew the woman had been murdered, surprising both Joe and the young anthropologist. As Joe and Claire examined the bones, they discovered that the woman had a broken neck and had likely been attacked with a blunt blade. Joe also deduced that, contrary to Thompson's initial hypothesis, the woman was of Caucasian descent and not an African slave, which puzzled the young researcher. After sending Thompson on his way, Claire asked Joe for his opinion on something more personal. With a mix of seriousness and humor, she asked if she was still sexually attractive, which took Joe by surprise. After a careful examination, Joe assured her she was, but jokingly commented on her thinness and abundant hair. Claire explained that it had been 20 years since she last saw someone important and needed to know how she had changed in that time. Joe, catching the seriousness behind the question, guessed that Claire was referring to Brianna's father, something he had figured out over time. Claire, encouraged by Joe's understanding, confirmed that it was about Jamie, the man she had loved so long ago. She revealed to Joe that Brianna was in Scotland, searching for her own history, and that soon she might reunite with Jamie herself if all went as hoped. With Joe's help, Claire arranged her departure from the hospital, leaving a letter of resignation and ensuring that Brianna would inherit everything when the time came. As she left the hospital, Claire felt a mix of emotions: panic, sadness, and above all, an indescribable joy at realizing that she was on her way to reuniting with Jamie. Chapter 21. Claire had returned to Inverness, where Roger, brimming with excitement, could hardly contain himself as he shared a crucial discovery: the deed of cession for Lallybroch, signed by Jamie Fraser, her Jamie. Roger and Brianna took her to the manor where they had the evidence, an ancient and valuable document that Roger had managed to extract from the Scottish Public Archive, SPA, only after arduous negotiations. In the manor, Roger showed Claire a manuscript he had found, accompanied by a printed publication from 1765 in a newspaper called Foresters, edited by one Alexander Malcolm in Edinburgh. Seeing the deed of cession and the marginal notes on the documents, Claire felt a mixture of disbelief and joy upon confirming that the handwriting belonged to Jamie. The initials QED signing the article provided her with definitive proof that Jamie had survived at least until 1765. As Roger and Brianna enthusiastically discussed their findings, Claire couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with emotion. The proof that Jamie had been alive and active so many years after their separation filled her with hope but also uncertainty about what she should do next. Finally, Brianna, showing a mix of bravery and pain, suggested to her mother that she should go back to find Jamie. Despite the fear of losing her daughter, Claire knew she had to seize the opportunity to reunite with the love of her life. Claire then went to a clothing store, searching for a dress suitable for her potential return to the past. The shop assistant, a small, enthusiastic woman, helped her choose a long, elegant gown in a golden tone with brown and amber highlights. Although Claire felt somewhat out of place, the choice of the dress symbolized her decision to return to the 18th century, where Jamie awaited her. Chapter 22. On the eve of her departure, Claire, Brianna, and Roger shared an emotionally charged dinner. Roger handed Claire a small fortune in old coins, carefully selected to help her on her journey to the past. As they counted the money, Claire noticed how the intimate gestures between Brianna and Roger suggested a deeper bond, stirring a whirlwind of conflicting feelings within her. After dinner, Roger proposed a small Samhain ritual, where Claire stepped out of the inn with her eyes closed. According to tradition, the first thing she saw upon opening them would be an omen for her future. When Claire opened her eyes, she saw a policeman approaching her, which Roger interpreted as a sign of good luck, an indication that Claire would find what she was looking for. Back at the house, the emotional tension overflowed. Claire realized how much she would miss her daughter and Roger, and deeply appreciated their support. Though they tried to remain optimistic, the weight of the impending separation was palpable. Claire went upstairs, leaving Brianna and Roger alone. Brianna, trying to cope with her feelings, confessed to Roger how terrifying the idea of losing her mother was, the one person who had always been there for her. Roger, in an attempt to console her, shared the story of how he had kept his parents' belongings as an anchor to his own history, even though he had never opened them. Later, as Roger was about to retire, Claire came downstairs to speak with him. She confided that, although she was determined to leave before dawn, she was overwhelmed with fear. Unable to face a direct farewell with Brianna, she handed Roger a letter to give her after her departure. Despite everything, Roger tried to reassure her, promising to take care of Brianna in her absence. Claire, feeling the weight of the decision she had made, thanked Roger for all his support. After a brief and emotional moment, she bid him farewell with a light kiss, disappearing like a ghost into the darkness of the night as the Halloween wind gently blew, carrying away the last vestiges of her indecision. Chapter 23. In the misty dawn of Cray Na Dun, Claire, wrapped in her cloak, felt the weight of fear and uncertainty as she prepared for what might be her final journey. The taxi driver, puzzled by the desolate spot where he had taken her, offered to wait for her or return later, but Claire, though doubtful and terrified, decided to press on alone. As she climbed the hill, each step felt heavier, as if panic were trying to stop her. She thought of Brianna, of the quiet certainty she had sensed the night before as she watched her sleep, and of the chaos and terror she remembered feeling the first time she crossed the stones. However, something stronger drove her to keep going until she finally reached the top. To her surprise, she found Brianna and Roger sitting on the grass in front of the great split stone. Brianna, dressed in an outfit similar to hers, but in an unfortunate lime green shade, stood to greet her. When Claire, bewildered, asked what they were doing there, Brianna replied firmly that they had come to see her off. Brianna explained that if Claire wasn't willing to cross the stones, she would do it herself. She had heard the stone's sounds when Gillian Duncan crossed, making her believe she could also do it. But more than that, Brianna felt it was her duty to ensure that Jamie Fraser knew he had succeeded, that his sacrifice had borne fruit in Brianna's existence. With tears in her eyes, Brianna implored her mother to cross and give Jamie the message that his daughter had been born. Deeply moved, Claire realized she couldn't let her daughter face such an uncertain fate alone. Brianna, with the resolve of someone who has made a difficult decision, gave her a final kiss and gently pushed her toward the stones, lovingly and desperately insisting that she go. Claire, with the roar of the stones filling her ears, took one last step toward the cleft, and in an instant, the world as she knew it disappeared. Part 6. Edinburgh. Chapter 24. When Claire awoke after her journey through the stones, her first coherent thought was that it was raining, indicating that she was likely in Scotland. She opened her eyes with difficulty, feeling her face cold and swollen, and as she looked up, she realized she was in the middle of a green, misty moor. Still dazed and soaked from the rain, her thoughts turned to Brianna and finally to Jamie, who had been her anchor throughout the process. With effort, she stood, leaning against a rowan tree, known in Scottish culture to protect against witchcraft. From there, she could see a rough path winding toward the base of the mountain, reminding her that she was definitely in the past, in a Scotland that was no longer the same as the one she had left. Determined to find Jamie, Claire began her march, aware that she could not return to the future and that her only option was to move forward. The journey from Inverness to Edinburgh was long and uncomfortable, shared with several people in a coach, among them a man named Wallace, a young lawyer who showed an obvious attraction to Claire. However, her mind was occupied with the possibility that Malcolm, the printer she hoped to find in Edinburgh, was indeed Jamie, using his full name, James Alexander Malcolm Mackenzie Fraser, but shortened to protect himself after the defeat at Culloden. Upon arriving in Edinburgh, Claire hurriedly disembarked from the coach and, after politely ridding herself of the insistent Wallace, began her search for Malcolm's print shop. Finding the shop, a modest establishment in Carfax Close, she paused briefly to catch her breath and muster her courage before finally pushing the door open and stepping inside. Inside, Claire saw Jamie bent over a press, his broad, familiar back turned to her. Hearing her call his name, Jamie turned slowly, recognizing her voice, but unable to believe what he was hearing. When their eyes met, Claire saw the color drain from Jamie's face, who, after a few moments of disbelief, fainted and collapsed to the floor. When he awoke, Jamie tried to understand if Claire was real or an illusion, but upon touching her, he knew he wasn't dreaming. The two sat together on the floor of the print shop, embracing and weeping for the 20 years they had been apart. In a tender gesture, Jamie stroked Claire's hair, acknowledging that throughout all those years, he had dreamed of her but had never been able to touch her in his visions. The deep emotion and reunion were interrupted by the unexpected arrival of Geordie, Jamie's employee, who, upon seeing them in what appeared to be a compromising situation, decided to quit, leaving Jamie laughing uproariously at the absurdity of the situation. They went upstairs together, where Claire was relieved to see that Jamie lived alone. In the small room, she showed Jamie the photos of Brianna she had brought with her. Jamie, astonished and emotional upon seeing the images of his daughter, went through a roller coaster of emotions as he held the photos with trembling hands. With each picture, from Brie as a baby to her teenage years, Jamie absorbed the reality that he had a daughter, a brave young woman who, though he had never met her, already occupied an immense place in his heart. After the initial shock, Jamie, still moved, asked Claire to tell him everything about Brianna, to which she eagerly agreed, sharing with him stories from her childhood. The atmosphere was filled with warmth and love as they reconnected, now as partners, parents, and companions in this new chapter of their lives. The conversation was interrupted when Jamie suddenly remembered an important appointment with Mr. Willoughby, an acquaintance. Wasting no time, they prepared to leave, with Claire assuring Jamie that she would accompany him anywhere, as now, more than ever, she was not willing to leave him. Chapter 25. Claire and Jamie quickly made their way to a tavern called World's End, just a few steps from the Carfax Close arcade, seeking shelter from the heavy downpour that battered the city. The place was full of smoke and voices, creating a warm and bustling atmosphere in contrast to the cold storm outside. Jamie, who seemed to be a regular customer, was greeted with nods of recognition and set about finding Mr. Willoughby, a business associate who was apparently in the depths of the establishment. They descended together down a narrow staircase, leading to a dark basement. The place was filled with barrels and crates and seemed deserted. Frustrated, Jamie began calling out in an unfamiliar language until a small blue figure darted out of the shadows, striking him and knocking him to the ground. Claire rushed to help him, discovering that Mr. Willoughby was none other than a diminutive Chinese man with an eccentric personality, visibly drunk and brimming with boundless energy. Jamie explained that Willoughby was a drunkard and should not be drinking in public places. Despite the circumstances, Claire couldn't help but wonder how Jamie had ended up involved with such a peculiar character. After a brief exchange with the barmaid, in which Jamie handed over some coins in exchange for the woman's patience and discretion, the group prepared to leave. However, before they could, an angry young prostitute recognized Willoughby, accusing him of doing something shameful related to her feet, causing a tense scene in the tavern. Jamie skillfully evaded the men who tried to attack them, and after a brief chase, they took refuge in a small alley. There, Jamie explained to Claire that Willoughby had a strange obsession with women's feet and that it was best to avoid going into detail. Finally, Jamie led Claire to an unassuming building in a secluded alley where a woman, Madame Jean, opened the door for them. The familiarity with which she treated Jamie and her evident displeasure upon seeing Claire raised suspicions in her. Despite the discomfort, Jamie introduced Claire as his wife and asked for a room and new clothes for her. Claire, unsettled by the situation, confronted Jamie, asking why he had a permanent room in a brothel. Jamie, somewhat embarrassed, explained that he had an arrangement with Madame Jean to use the room and obtain other services related to his printing business, but firmly denied any improper relations with the women there. Later, in the room, after a quiet dinner and superficial conversation, the tension between them began to ease, giving way to a moment of intimacy. Jamie, after expressing doubts about Claire's reason for returning, let himself be swept up in the emotion of their reunion, and together they shared a night full of passion but also marked by the uncertainty of what the future held for them. In the darkness of the night, as the storm continued to rage outside, Jamie and Claire, now reunited, surrendered to the love that had kept them connected through the years and hardships. Though aware of the many changes in their lives, their bond remained strong, and together they promised never to be separated again. Chapter 26. Claire woke up startled in the cold room, immediately noticing Jamie's absence beside her. She found him standing by the wash basin, his silhouette barely visible in the gray light filtering through the window. After a brief exchange of words, both were trapped in a silence full of tension, aware of the changes time had imposed on their bodies and their relationship. Despite the doubts and fears, they confirmed that they were still connected by something deep and essential. The conversation turned to painful memories and difficult decisions they had both made. Jamie recounted the hardships of Culloden, his recovery at Lallybroch under his sister Jenny's care, and how he had survived despite everything. Claire, in turn, expressed her anguish over leaving Jamie, but he comforted her, telling her they had done the right thing by protecting their daughter. The tension broke when there was a knock at the door, and a bewildered Ian Murray, Jamie's brother-in-law, appeared. The surprise was total upon discovering that Claire was alive and back. After a brief and agitated encounter, Jamie and Ian set off in search of young Ian, who had run away from home to find his uncle in Edinburgh. Left alone, Claire decided to go down to the brothel's dining room, where she encountered a group of prostitutes having breakfast. The women welcomed her kindly, though mistakenly believing she was a new worker there. The atmosphere became even stranger when Madame Jean found her there and, horrified by the confusion, took her to a room to dress. From that moment on, the morning turned chaotic. Claire learned of the existence of a killer known as the Demon of Edinburgh, who had been terrorizing the city with brutal murders. Shortly afterward, Fergus appeared, bringing news of an urgent contraband delivery that Jamie had to receive. The situation became complicated when a strange man, posing as a policeman, was confronted by Mr. Willoughby, the Chinese man accompanying Jamie, who shot and killed him. The chaos continued as Jamie and Fergus tried to manage the situation, hiding the body and organizing the contraband delivery in the brothel's secret basement. Claire, who had gotten blood on her during the incident, had to wash in icy water while Jamie reflected on the events and the implications of the supposed policeman's appearance. The situation was tense, with multiple factors at play. The search for young Ian, the contraband, the constant danger of the Demon of Edinburgh, and the need to keep Claire safe. Despite everything, in the midst of the chaos, Jamie and Claire found moments to reconnect and express the fear and love that still united them. Chapter 27. Claire was sitting next to Jamie in Mowbray's tavern, enjoying a bowl of soup while they talked. Jamie, now known as Sonny Malcolm, printer and editor, explained that he used this name as a nickname for Alexander in the Highlands. Though they bore different names, Claire remained his wife, something Jamie reaffirmed as he caressed her foot beneath the table. However, their moment of tranquility was interrupted when a man dressed in a green coat approached them. He introduced himself as an emissary of Sir Percival Turner, an individual who, though pretending to be courteous, left Jamie uneasy. Jamie politely but firmly declined Sir Percival's invitation, preferring to continue his lunch in Claire's company. Jamie then explained to Claire his concern about an imminent trip to the north of Scotland to receive a smuggled shipment. Although Sir Percival had hinted that the weather would be dangerous, Jamie suspected there was more behind his warning. Despite everything, Jamie was determined to fulfill his mission. As they continued talking in one of the tavern's private rooms, Jamie and Claire enjoyed a moment of peace, where they both shared their happiness at being together again. Jamie confessed his doubts about whether he had lost his humanity due to the years of struggle, but Claire reassured him, telling him that although they had both changed, their love remained strong. Their conversation was interrupted when Jamie noticed an unusual glow in the clouds. Alarm set in when they realized there was a fire in Carfax Close, near Jamie's print shop. Without thinking, Jamie ran to the scene of the fire, followed by Claire. Upon arrival, they saw that the fire had engulfed the print shop, and Jamie, distressed, entered to try to save what he could. With the help of some men, Jamie managed to get his precious press out, but the fire was becoming increasingly intense. While Claire waited outside, she saw Jamie appear on the roof with young Ian, who had been trapped in the building. With great effort, they managed to lower young Ian safely. Back at Madame Jean's brothel, young Ian confessed that he had accidentally started the fire while trying to defend himself from a man who had broken into the print shop. This man, a sailor, had been searching for something among the shop's pamphlets, and when young Ian confronted him, a struggle broke out, resulting in the fire. Jamie, though concerned, reassured his nephew, telling him he wasn't a murderer and hadn't committed a mortal sin. He also advised him to go to confession to ease his conscience. While young Ian recovered, Jamie and Ian Murray, the boy's father, discussed the danger the young man was in by being involved in Jamie's smuggling activities. Ian Murray was furious, feeling betrayed by Jamie for involving his son in such dangerous affairs. Despite the tension, Jamie defended his actions, arguing that he had never wanted to put young Ian in danger. In the end, young Ian decided to stay with Jamie that night, leaving his father hurt but resigned. Jamie, for his part, faced the challenge of helping his nephew deal with the consequences of what had happened, while Claire watched, aware of the gravity of the situation. Chapter 28. After the day's events, Claire and Jamie shared a quiet dinner in their room, reflecting on what had happened. Jamie, his mind full of worries, admitted that the man young Ian had followed was likely connected to Sir Percival's warning. Though he appeared calm, he explained to Claire that his smuggling activities didn't go unnoticed and that an expert taster could trace him through the brandy he brought from France, thanks to his cousin Jared. As they talked, Claire suggested that the sailor might have followed them to the brothel, a place where any man could enter without raising suspicion. Jamie agreed and decided to speak with Madame Jean to investigate if anyone had seen the mysterious man. Shortly afterward, Jean arrived accompanied by Fergus, who reported that he had quickly sold the brandy and disposed of the intruder's body. Claire, somewhat concerned, asked how he had done it, and Fergus, with his characteristic cheekiness, explained that the body had been disguised as a barrel of creme de menthe. destined to be shipped far away. The conversation took an unexpected turn when Fergus suggested that young Ian might spend the night with one of the brothel girls. Jamie, initially scandalized by the idea, protested, reminding them that his nephew was only 14. However, Fergus, with the familiarity of someone well-versed in the environment, insisted that Ian was at the right age to learn about certain aspects of life. Young Ian, though surprised at first, accepted the idea with enthusiasm. When Second Mary, a sweet blonde girl, appeared, Ian couldn't hide his amazement and, with his sweet smile, left the room determined to have his first adult experience. As Ian departed, Jamie and Claire were left alone. Jamie, reflecting on the situation, admitted that he didn't know whether to thank Fergus or be angry with him. Though he was concerned about how he would explain what had happened to Jenny, he also understood that Fergus had acted in what he believed was Ian's best interest. Finally, as they prepared for bed, Jamie confessed to Claire that he hadn't been entirely honest with young Ian. He explained that men, when disturbed by having killed someone, often sought comfort in a woman, which could help heal the wounds of the soul. In some way, he allowed Ian to be with Second Mary so that he wouldn't spend the night tormented by the day's events. Claire, understanding the complexity of the situation, offered Jamie comfort, hinting that he might also need that kind of relief. Jamie, smiling, accepted the offer, asking her to treat him gently. Chapter 29. Claire, seeking to stock up on medical remedies, decided to visit Hawes Apothecary in Edinburgh. Though the shop had changed over time, it still retained its essence. There, she was attended by a young apothecary who admitted he didn't know all the uses of medicinal herbs, which led Claire to help him identify some bottles, demonstrating her knowledge of remedies. During her search, a reverend named Archibald Campbell, impatiently waiting for his own order, approached Claire to consult her about a strange nervous ailment suffered by a woman, mentioning that the patient alternated between screaming and a state of muteness. The Reverend invited Claire to visit the patient in Caribber's Close, and though she had other commitments, she agreed to meet him later. After some jokes with Jamie about their respective confessions and family matters, Claire headed to the inn with Ian to visit the Reverend's sister, Miss Margaret Campbell. Upon arrival, Claire learned of Margaret's tragic story. In her youth, she had been raped and nearly killed by English soldiers after the Battle of Culloden. This trauma left her mentally unstable, with episodes of paralysis and uncontrollable screaming. As Claire examined Margaret, she noticed that the woman was in a catatonic state, her eyes fixed on nothing. Claire prescribed some remedies to help alleviate her symptoms, but admitted that she couldn't do much more for her. However, just as Claire and Ian were about to leave, Margaret suddenly broke her silence with a scream, disturbing everyone present. Back at the brothel where they were staying, Claire and Ian reunited with Jamie and Fergus, who were planning their next smuggling operation. Jamie decided to change the delivery location to avoid a possible ambush, according to Sir Percival's warning. As they talked, Claire mentioned her encounter with Margaret Campbell, leading Jamie to remember a soldier named Ewan Cameron, who had been Margaret's partner before being executed by the English after Culloden. Reflecting on the ravages of war and the tragedy it left in its wake, Jamie prepared to fulfill his duties and embark on a trip to Arbroath, where the smuggling would continue, but not before ensuring that his nephew Ian would be under Claire's care. Chapter 30. During the journey to Arbroath, Claire observed the dynamic between Jamie and young Ian, where the stubbornness of both became evident. This tension culminated when they arrived in Arbroath and discovered that the inn where Jamie planned to leave Claire and Ian had been destroyed. With no other option, Jamie allowed them both to accompany him to the edge of the cliff, on the condition that Ian take care of his aunt. As night fell, Jamie met with his men on the coast, preparing for an exchange with a French ship. Fergus, Mr. Willoughby, and other accomplices joined the group, bringing a loaded cart. The operation took place in a remote location, and Willoughby was in charge of handling a signal lamp to communicate with a ship offshore. Though young Ian insisted on helping, Jamie kept him away, aware of the danger. As the tension mounted, Claire noticed something strange in the sand, but before she could investigate, the exchange was interrupted by a group of policemen shouting orders in the king's name. Chaos erupted on the beach, and Jamie, determined to protect his people, shot at Willoughby's lamp, causing it to explode in a shower of burning oil. The confrontation intensified, and in the confusion, Claire and Ian tried to stay safe. True to his word, Jamie ordered Claire and Ian to flee, but Claire couldn't help worrying about Jamie and Willoughby, who seemed to be in danger. As they escaped, Claire and Ian overheard some guards on the road, talking about catching the smugglers who managed to escape the beach. Ian, distressed by the situation, hesitated between obeying Jamie and taking Claire safely to Lallybroch or going to Arbroath Abbey, where the group had a rendezvous point in case something went wrong. Finally, Claire decided they should go to the Abbey to warn the others. Ian set off for the Abbey through a shortcut, while Claire continued along the main road, trying to distract the policemen and buy time for her nephew. As she advanced, Claire reflected on how to handle the situation, aware of the danger they all faced and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. Chapter 31. Amidst the darkness, with the wind stirring the branches and masking any sound, Claire advanced along the path, feeling as though she were being stalked by spirits or something worse. Suddenly, a man grabbed her from behind, covering her mouth and forcing her to fight for her life. Using a stone she held in her hand, she managed to strike her attacker and knee him in the groin, allowing her to break free. When a voice whispered her name in the darkness, Claire startled again, but soon recognized Jamie, who had found her. Together, they discovered that the man who had attacked Claire was Fergus, who had mistaken her for an enemy in the gloom. Claire warned Jamie of the nearby policemen, but it seemed that none of them had heard the noise from her brief struggle. Jamie called out to his men, and one by one, they emerged from the bushes, showing that nearly all had escaped the disaster on the beach. Concerned about the policemen, Jamie decided to investigate, taking Fergus and Meldrum with him while the others waited anxiously in the darkness. After a while, Jamie returned and called for them. When Claire followed him, she was met with the disturbing sight of a policeman hanging from a tree, his face grotesquely distorted by death. Jamie explained that the man was an officer named Thomas Oakey and seemed resigned to the fact that he would be blamed for the man's death. The smugglers, nervous about the scene, were eager to leave the area as quickly as possible. At that moment, Claire remembered Ian and told Jamie that the young man had gone to the Abbey to warn the others. However, Jamie pointed out that the Abbey was in the opposite direction. Just as they were about to leave, Ian emerged from the bushes, worried about Claire's safety after seeing the torchlight. Jamie reassured Ian, and without letting him see the hanged body, extinguished the torch and guided everyone toward the horses, where Willoughby was waiting for them. The night had been dangerous, but with dawn only a few hours away, Jamie promised that they would be safe in the Highlands, far from pursuit. Part 7. Home Again. Chapter 32. The journey back to Lallybroch was long and silent, laden with worries for everyone. As they rode, Claire couldn't stop thinking about how she would be received by Jenny, Jamie's sister, who must have already learned of her unexpected return. Along the way, Jamie detoured to a small hidden cave, leaving Claire and Ian intrigued. Although he found signs that someone had been there recently, Jamie didn't seem concerned about the person's identity. Finally, after days of travel, they arrived at Lallybroch, the Fraser family home. Claire marveled at how, despite the years and changes, the place retained its essence. However, both Jamie and Ian were nervous about the impending family reunion, especially young Ian, who expected a scolding for his escape. Upon their arrival, Ian was greeted by his sister Janet, who scolded him for his disheveled state. Jamie, Claire, and young Ian approached the house, where they were welcomed by Ian and Jenny Murray. Although the scene was warm, the tension was palpable. Jenny, upon seeing Claire, was stunned, as if she were seeing a ghost, but after a moment of disbelief, she embraced her warmly, reminding her how much she had been missed. The welcome was more difficult for Jamie and Ian. Ian Sr. was visibly upset with his son for leaving without permission, causing great worry for his mother. Despite Jamie's explanations, Ian decided that his son should be punished for his disobedience. In an unexpected turn, Ian handed the strap to Jamie, demanding that he be the one to whip the boy, arguing that if Jamie wanted to be a father figure to Ian, he had to assume all responsibilities, even the hardest ones. Reluctantly, Jamie agreed. After apologizing to Ian for taking him to Edinburgh and exposing him to danger, he proceeded with the punishment, though with evident pain. When he finished, Jamie did something that left everyone stunned. He handed the strap to young Ian and ordered him to punish him, explaining that he too had made mistakes and must pay for them. Although the boy protested, Jamie insisted, and after receiving the blows, they both sealed an agreement to never repeat the experience. Finally, after this act of reconciliation, Jamie and Ian returned to the house, where Jenny and Ian Sr. received them with a mix of relief and respect. The family was reunited once again, though with visible scars, both physical and emotional. Chapter 33. Claire and Jamie, finally in the tranquility of Lallybroch, enjoyed a night together after the tense days of travel. In the intimacy of their room, they joked about Jamie's red bottom, comparing it to a baboon's, and shared the comfort of being back in a bed, far from the cold and dampness of the previous days. As they cuddled in the warmth of the bed, Jamie confessed to Claire that although young Ian had probably learned an important lesson, what mattered most to him was regaining the approval of his sister Jenny and his brother-in-law Ian. Both reflected on the inherent stubbornness of the Frasers, and Jamie commented on how this trait defined the members of his family, including young Ian. The conversation took a more serious tone when Jamie began to recount a story from the past related to the buried treasure he found after escaping from Ardsmuir prison. He told Claire how a dying man named Duncan Kerr revealed the location of a treasure intended for Prince Charles Edward Stuart. Following the confused clues Kerr gave him, Jamie traveled to a remote place on the coast of Scotland, in the Mackenzie territory, where he had to swim to a seal-covered islet to find the treasure. Jamie described how, on the brink of exhaustion, a current led him to the islet, where he found a large male seal staring at him intently. After a tense moment, the seal slipped into the water, leaving him to inspect the rocks. In a deep crevice, Jamie found a small box and a leather pouch containing ancient gold and silver coins, as well as precious stones. However, the treasure was not what he had expected, and the amount he found could not have financed an army, as rumored. Despite the temptation to flee with the treasure, Jamie decided to return to prison to avoid endangering the villagers who might have helped him, and because he felt a responsibility towards the men imprisoned in Ardsmuir. Claire, touched, assured him that he had done the right thing. The next morning, Claire woke at dawn and got up to stoke the fire, wrapped in Jamie's shirt. From the window, she saw 3 riders approaching over the hill and assumed they were Jamie and Jenny's daughters, returning home. Back in bed, Claire and Jamie cuddled again, joking and enjoying their closeness. Suddenly, their tranquility was interrupted when the door burst open. A young woman, whom Claire did not recognize, looked at them in horror. With her eyes fixed on Claire and then on Jamie, who was caught in a compromising situation, the young woman exclaimed indignantly, "Father, who is this woman?" Chapter 34. Claire could hardly believe what she had just heard. The blonde young woman at the door had called Jamie father, and the situation quickly turned chaotic. Jamie, petrified by surprise, tried to regain control of the situation. However, everything became even more complicated when Voyager stormed into the room in a fury. The presence of the woman Claire remembered for her hatred and resentment only intensified the confusion. Voyager, overflowing with rage, accused Jamie of betraying her and lashed out at Claire, demanding that she leave and give Jamie back to her. Although Jamie managed to stop Voyager before the situation got further out of control, the atmosphere was charged with tension. After dragging Voyager out of the room, Jamie tried to explain himself to Claire, but she, hurt and furious, refused to listen to him. Pain and betrayal filled the room. Jamie, desperate to make Claire understand his situation, confessed that he had never told her about Voyager because he feared losing her again. However, Claire could not accept his excuses. The damage was already done. The argument quickly escalated, turning into a physical fight, in which they both released the frustration and anger accumulated during their years of separation. Amid the unleashed fury, Jenny burst into the room and, horrified by what she saw, threw cold water on them to stop the scene. Jamie, still agitated and confused, slowly stepped back, letting shame and misunderstanding wash over him. Jenny, furious and surprised by her brother's behavior, scolded Jamie for acting like an animal, reminding him that he needed to behave with dignity. Disconcerted and ashamed, Jamie silently accepted Jenny's words before leaving the room, leaving Claire wrapped in a blanket, still trembling from the intensity of what had just happened. Chapter 35. Claire was in a state of emotional fragility, and her sister-in-law, Jenny, tried to comfort her by laying her down in bed and assuring her that Jamie would not approach her again. Although Jenny expressed her anger toward Jamie, Claire hurried to clarify that the blame was not solely his, but shared between them. Jenny, with a tacit understanding, informed her that Jamie had gone to the hill, a place he often visited when he was troubled. As Claire tried to pull herself together, Janet, Jenny's daughter, arrived with a tray of food and drink. The girl was visibly affected and, after a hesitant apology, confessed that she had informed Voyager, Jamie's wife, of Claire's presence at Lallybroch, which had caused the conflict. Claire bore no grudge toward the young woman, understanding that Jenny had given the order. Determined to leave, Claire expressed her desire to depart immediately, and Jenny, without arguing, prepared a horse for her journey. Claire left, aware that this would be the last time she would leave Lallybroch. She traveled aimlessly, seeking refuge in the numbness that the solitude and monotony of the journey provided. As the day wore on, hunger forced her to stop and eat, which unfortunately also rekindled her feelings. She painfully recalled the deep connection she had shared with Jamie, a connection she felt she could no longer recover. In a moment of emotional weakness, while resting in a forest, she was startled by young Ian, who appeared without warning. Ian explained that Jamie had sent him to find her, as he himself was gravely injured after an altercation with Voyager, who had shot him. Claire, initially skeptical and resentful, finally agreed to listen to Ian and understood the seriousness of the situation. The return journey to Lallybroch was tense. Claire was consumed by a mix of anger and concern, questioning whether Jamie was truly at death's door or if it was all a ruse to get her to return. Despite her doubts, she felt compelled to go back, with the latent threat of making Jamie pay for her anguish if he was not in the grave condition Ian had described. Chapter 36. Claire and young Ian arrived at Lallybroch late at night, soaked by the rain. The house was shrouded in silence, with only a few lights on. As they entered the hall, Jenny appeared, visibly relieved to see her son, but also angry at his absence. Ian, feeling guilty, avoided explaining his absence and instead allowed Claire to be seen, leaving Jenny astonished. However, despite the surprise, Jenny decided that reproaches could wait and sent her son to bed, while Claire inquired about Jamie. Jenny pointed toward the parlor, indicating that Jamie was there. Claire, aware of the gravity of the situation, headed for the door, but before entering, she asked about Voyager, Jamie's wife. Jenny replied that Voyager had left, and without further delay, Claire entered the room where Jamie lay on a cot, weakened by fever. Jamie was sleeping deeply, his long figure silhouetted against the glow of the embers. Claire, her hands trembling from the cold, waited for her temperature to normalize before touching him. When she finally placed her hand on Jamie's forehead, she felt the intense heat radiating from his skin. The fever was high, and although she didn't want to wake him, she knew he would soon need attention. As she watched Jamie, Claire's thoughts wandered to the obligations they had both taken on in their lives. Jamie, always honorable, had borne many responsibilities, from his family to the prisoners and smugglers. Claire, on the other hand, had been freed from many of her responsibilities with Frank's death and Brianna's growth. Now, she faced the reality that Jamie had made difficult decisions without having time to prepare for her return. When Jamie awoke, he recognized Claire and murmured loving words, believing that she would forgive him for his actions. However, when Claire touched him, Jamie realized that it wasn't a fever-induced delusion, but reality. Startled by her presence, Jamie exclaimed with astonishment and pain, asking what she was doing there. Claire, with a mix of tenderness and irritation, helped him lie down and began to examine his wound. The wound, An opening in the arm near the elbow was infected and oozing. Jamie, weakened by fever and pain, asked Claire to stay with him a while longer, fearing that his life was slipping away. Claire, despite her reservations, agreed to stay, determined not to let Jamie die. Taking a syringe and a vial of penicillin from her case, Claire prepared an injection. Jamie, complaining that the procedure was uncomfortable and painful, didn't understand how an injection in the buttocks could cure his arm. Claire patiently explained that the injection would kill the germs causing the infection in his body. As the penicillin began to take effect, Claire assured Jamie that she wouldn't let him die, though she joked that the temptation was great. Despite the pain and fever, Jamie smiled at Claire's words, accepting his fate with resignation and gratitude. Though weakened, his characteristic humor remained intact, and he was thankful that, after everything that had happened, Claire was there to save him once again. Chapter 37. After administering the injection to Jamie, Claire stayed by his side, letting him hold her hand until he fell into a deep sleep. She spent the night beside him, waking periodically to give him more doses of penicillin. As the morning wore on, she noticed with relief that Jamie's fever was beginning to subside, which gave her a momentary sense of satisfaction, recognizing the power of penicillin over the diseases of the 18th century. Later, returning with a cup of hot tea, Claire sat waiting for Jamie to wake up. When he finally showed signs of life, he pretended to still be groggy, but Claire, not fooled, demanded that he tell her about Voyager. Although he tried to avoid the conversation, Jamie finally gave in, beginning to recount how, after returning from England, he felt like a stranger in his own land. The long absence had distanced him from his family and home, making him feel disconnected and alone. Jenny had been persistent in her desire for Jamie to remarry. It was through Ned Gowan, an old acquaintance of Claire's, that Voyager was mentioned, who had been widowed twice and needed stability for herself and her daughters. Jamie recalled a New Year's Eve party at Lallybroch, where he and Voyager danced all night. At dawn, when she participated in a traditional game for single women, the first thing she saw when she opened her eyes was Jamie, which many took as a sign of their destined union. Jamie, needing something to give his life meaning, and Voyager needing a husband, ended up marrying. However, the marriage was a failure from the start. Jamie described how, despite his efforts to be kind and attentive, Voyager always seemed disappointed and fearful. Nothing he did seemed right, and she would go weeks without speaking to him. Voyager, with a pain that Jamie couldn't understand or heal, avoided him, and finally, unable to endure the situation any longer, he decided to leave. Claire, hearing this, took his hand, feeling relieved to notice that his pulse was steady and that his conditions seemed to be improving. She asked if his arm hurt much, and receiving a yes in response, promised to make him some willow bark tea to ease the pain. Jamie, however, stopped her, saying that what would relieve him most would be to lay his head in Claire's lap while she massaged his temples. Claire, with a mix of tenderness and firmness, agreed, reminding him that he wouldn't escape the next injection. Sitting together on the cot, Claire began to massage his temples, and without meaning to, her hands gently traced his neck and shoulders, seeking to ease his tension. Though Claire tried to maintain some distance until everything was resolved between them, the closeness and physical contact comforted them both. During the early hours, as they remained together in the darkness, Jamie reflected on the security he felt with Claire, without the need to hide anything. They both shared the relief of being completely honest with each other, something that had been missing in their separate lives. Jamie spoke of how he had assumed so many identities over the years, being a different man for each person around him. But there, with Claire, in the darkness, he felt that he had no name, that he was simply himself. Claire, moved, responded with a simple but profound "I love you," sealing with those words the reunion of their souls. Chapter 38. After several days of penicillin treatment, Jamie began to recover. His fever disappeared, and the swelling in his arm subsided, though the wound still required care. Claire, satisfied with his progress, finally allowed herself to go upstairs to wash. There she found a basin of hot water and a fine French soap, a subtle reminder of her position as a guest, but still somewhat an outsider to the Lallybroch family. As she came down, Claire encountered a lively scene in the hall. Jamie, now more recovered, was surrounded by several children, including some of his nephews. There was a warm exchange of introductions and jokes, with young Jamie recalling how Claire used to play with him when he was a child. The conversation was interrupted when a small boy asked if Claire was as old as his grandmother, to which Jamie responded with a smile, joking about Claire's lack of gray hair. While interacting with the children, Claire noticed that Jenny was not present. Jenny's absence felt strange, given her nature as the center of life at Lallybroch. Though the atmosphere in the kitchen was cozy, Claire decided to step outside to the barn to avoid the bustle. There she found Fergus, who seemed worried. After a brief conversation, Fergus revealed that he was in love with a respectable young woman, but her mother did not accept his proposal due to his lack of a respectable livelihood. Concerned about her relationship with Jamie, Claire offered her help, suggesting that Jamie could intervene. However, Fergus asked her not to tell Jamie, as he didn't want to add to his worries. Returning to the house, Claire encountered Jenny, who was visibly worried about the imminent arrival of Hobart Mackenzie, Leager's brother. Jenny feared that Hobart was coming to seek revenge for what had happened to his sister, but Jamie, though injured, refused to flee. The tension increased when Jenny mentioned that Hobart was accompanied by a lawyer, indicating that the situation could become legally complicated. When Hobart arrived, he turned out to be a timid and small man, far from the image of an avenger. The real challenge came with the appearance of Ned Gowan, the old lawyer who had once helped Claire. Ned, with his usual cunning, presented the legal complications of the case, including possible charges of bigamy and other accusations. Despite the legal threats, it became clear that Leager did not want to reclaim Jamie as her husband, but sought financial compensation. After intense negotiations, an agreement was reached. Jamie agreed to pay a substantial sum to Leager and secure the futures of her daughters with significant dowries, thus avoiding a prolonged legal battle. With the situation resolved, the family gathered to discuss the next step. Jenny, concerned for the future, mentioned the need to find a new husband for Leager as soon as possible. Jamie, for his part, realized that he needed to leave Lallybroch for a while, both for Leager's sake and because of other problems in Edinburgh. He revealed his plan to travel to France, possibly to settle there and accept an offer from his cousin Jared. In a difficult decision, Jenny and Ian agreed that young Ian should accompany Jamie on his journey, seeing it as an opportunity for the boy to learn and grow. Though worried, Jenny trusted that Claire and Jamie would take good care of her son, recognizing that they could not keep him at Lallybroch forever. Chapter 39. The part of Scotland through which Jamie, Claire, and young Ian traveled was desolate and harsh, very different from the green valleys of Lallybroch. The heather stretched endlessly, covering the land with a purple and gray carpet, while the rocks rose toward the sky, shrouded in thick mist. Despite the harshness of the landscape, Ian was full of enthusiasm, eager to reach the island of seals. The plan was for Ian to swim to the island where Jamie had hidden a treasure years ago. Jamie, though concerned, guided his nephew calmly, explaining that the current would help him in his journey. When Ian descended the rock chimney to the beach, Jamie and Claire anxiously waited at the cliff's edge, watching as the young man plunged into the sea. The water was icy, and the mist was dense, but Ian swam with determination. As they waited for his return, Jamie was visibly tense, struggling against his desire to be in Ian's place. Although Claire tried to reassure him, Jamie's worry was palpable. Suddenly, the calm was broken by a shout, and Jamie leaped to his feet. Through the mist, they both saw a boat near the island. Two men appeared, one of them carrying Ian, unconscious or dead, and throwing him into the boat. Jamie and Claire watched helplessly as the men boarded the ship and it began to move away. There was no way to reach them, and desperation overcame Jamie, who leaped onto his horse, trying to follow the ship's trajectory. Reaching a lower point near the sea, Jamie tried to get a closer look, but the ship, already far away, began firing cannonballs at them. Claire, terrified, watched him dive to the ground to avoid the bullets as the ship disappeared into the mist. They returned to where the horses were, both in shock. Jamie, devastated by his powerlessness, tried to think of a plan. He knew they had to continue to France, where Jared, his cousin, might help them identify the ship and find out Ian's destination. However, the feeling of guilt overwhelmed him. He had promised his sister Jenny that he would take care of Ian, and now he had lost his nephew. That night, while Claire slept, Jamie withdrew, lost in his thoughts. When Claire woke and found him sitting alone, she joined him. Jamie, full of doubts and feeling guilty for desiring Claire so much that he had risked Ian's life, questioned whether it was a sin to have used the treasure to solve his own problems. Claire, with tenderness and firmness, comforted him, assuring him that their love was not a sin but a blessing. At dawn, they decided not to wait any longer and set off for Inverness, hoping that Jared would help them find Ian. With determination, Jamie and Claire prepared for the long journey, knowing that their path was full of uncertainties, but united in their purpose of saving Ian and staying together, no matter the challenges they had to face. Part 8. On the Water. Chapter 40. Jamie's cousin, Jared, an elderly man still full of energy, had arranged for the couple to board the Artemis, a medium-sized corvette, bound for the Caribbean. Jared, well-versed in the maritime world, warned Jamie of the dangers of sailing such a small vessel during winter storms, but Jamie, determined to rescue young Ian, was willing to take the risk. Claire, for her part, also prepared for the journey, seeking out everything necessary to face the possible medical challenges that might arise during the voyage. Jamie and Claire spent the night at Jared's house, where Jamie wrote a difficult letter to his sister Jenny, informing her of Ian's disappearance and their plans to rescue him. Although he feared Jenny's reaction, he knew it was necessary to be honest. After the letter, the couple shared a moment of intimacy, reaffirming their commitment to each other and their determination to face together the dangers that awaited them. The next day, a young coin dealer named Mayer, of Jewish origin, visited Jamie to show him some ancient coins. Jamie, interested in finding a connection between these coins and the treasure hidden on the island of Seals, examined the pieces closely. Mayer revealed that many of these rare coins had belonged to the Duke of Sandringham, a name that resonated strongly with Claire and Jamie, as the Duke had been a crucial figure in their past lives. Later, Claire went out to buy medicines, accompanied by Mr. Willoughby, a Chinese man who had helped in the search for remedies. During their walk, Claire encountered Reverend Archibald Campbell, a man she had crossed paths with before. After a brief chat, Mr. Willoughby made a derogatory comment about the Reverend's supposed holiness, insinuating that he had seen him in a disreputable place. That night, during dinner, Jared revealed that Jamie was a member of the Freemasonry, a secret fraternity. This detail became relevant because Jared gave Jamie letters of introduction to the lodges in the Caribbean, places where he could find help in his search for Ian. Claire was surprised to discover this aspect of Jamie, but her relationship with him was so strong and trusting that she accepted the revelation without question. Finally, Claire decided to make a personal visit to the Hôpital d'Angers in Paris, a place that held a painful memory for her. There, she visited the grave of her deceased daughter, marked simply with the word faith. Mother Hildegard, a wise and elderly woman, accompanied her in this moment, reminding her that time does not erase the pain of losing a child. After her visit to the cemetery, Claire and Mother Hildegard spent some time at the convent, where the mother offered Claire some remedies that might be useful on her journey. This chapter explores the depth of the love and responsibility that Jamie and Claire feel for those they love, and how, despite the dangers and uncertainties, they are willing to do whatever it takes to protect their family. Chapter 41. The Artemis made landfall at Cape Wrath on a typical Scottish day, grey and cold. Claire watched the mist-covered coastline from the tavern window while Jamie paced nervously along the dock. The return journey to Scotland had been as uncomfortable as their first crossing of the Channel, and Jamie, anxious to rescue young Ian, grew increasingly frustrated with any delay. The most recent delay was due to waiting for Fergus and the smugglers whom Jamie had dispatched before leaving for Le Havre. The smugglers arrived on shaggy ponies, led by Rayburn, followed by other men with distinctive features. However, Fergus was not with them. Apparently, he had urgent business to attend to, which concerned Jamie, who regarded Fergus as a son. Finally, as the Artemis was about to set sail, Fergus appeared on horseback, bringing with him Marzali Makimi, Voyager's daughter. Jamie, surprised and irritated, confronted Fergus and Marzali, who announced that they had married. Though angered, Jamie had no choice but to accept the marriage under the condition that the couple would not consummate the union until a priest formalized the ceremony in the Caribbean. During the first leg of the voyage, Jamie suffered terribly from seasickness. Despite Claire's and the ship's cook, Aloysius O'Shaughnessy Murphy's, attempts to alleviate his discomfort with remedies and broths, Jamie showed no signs of improvement. Finally, Mr. Willoughby, a Chinese man with knowledge of acupuncture, managed to stabilize Jamie, though not without some dark humor from Claire, who convinced him by mentioning the potential serious complications of prolonged seasickness. The chapter also reveals Jamie's fear that someone aboard the Artemis might be trying to kill him. Fergus mentions a series of suspicious incidents, such as a barrel that almost crushed Jamie and a fire in a shed, suggesting the possibility of a traitor among the smugglers. Claire is concerned for Jamie's safety, but also relieved to learn that his exile from Scotland was not solely her fault. Amid these troubles, Claire and Fergus strive to maintain calm on the ship, while Marzali continues to show hostility towards Claire, whom she blames for the breakup of her mother's marriage to Jamie. With Jamie slowly recovering and the threat of a potential traitor on board, the crew of the Artemis continues their journey to the Caribbean, each grappling with their own fears and challenges at sea. Chapter 42. The Artemis sailed southward, and with each passing day, Jamie and Claire found solace in the tranquility of the sea. Jamie, serving as supercargo, had few responsibilities once the cargo was checked, leaving him time to participate in cannon drills and chat with Tom Sturgis, the gunner. Meanwhile, Claire found her role as the ship's surgeon accepted by the crew without much fuss, allowing her to join Jamie in long moments of conversation and reflection. One night, as the moon rose brightly over the sea, Jamie and Claire paused to admire it from the ship's rail. Jamie, fascinated by the moon and the possibility that men might one day walk on its surface, listened in amazement as Claire described how, in her time, men were already preparing to do so. Their conversation led to talk of their daughter Brianna, whose photos Jamie kept in his pocket. As he looked at them, Jamie couldn't help but worry about Brianna's future and asked Claire if he had done the right thing in leaving her alone to reunite with him. Claire, though firm in her decision to return to Jamie, shared her own doubts and concerns about Brianna. She told Jamie that she had left a letter for her daughter, filled with advice and motherly love, hoping it would help her navigate life without her mother. The letter, emotional and sincere, reflected Claire's deep love for Brianna and her pain at leaving her behind. Moved by Claire's letter and her love for Brianna, Jamie reassured her that Brianna would be fine, thanks largely to the excellent mother she had. The scene ended with a tender moment between Jamie and Claire, reaffirming their love and the decision that had brought them back together. Chapter 43. Since the Artemis set sail, Fergus, Mr. Willoughby, Jamie, and Claire had been on high alert, watching the 6 Scottish smugglers, though none of them showed suspicious behavior. Over time, Claire began to relax and, except for Innes, maintained some reserve with them. One morning, Claire found Innes in a corner, hunched over in obvious pain. After examining him, she determined that he was suffering from gas and constipation, likely caused by the ship's diet. Concerned about the crew's conditions, Claire discovered that the food Murphy, the cook, prepared for them was inferior compared to the feasts he served the captain and passengers. After a conversation with Murphy, Claire offered to prepare a daily mash for the Scots to ensure they had a more balanced diet. As the days passed, Jamie and Claire resumed their routine. Jamie, happy after a day of fishing, mentioned how Innes had hidden in the latrine out of fear of Claire's threat to administer an enema if he couldn't relieve himself. Claire explained to Jamie how she had uncovered the Oatmeal War, and he reflected on how, after Culloden, the relationship between the Scots had changed, and he was now just an employer to them, not their laird. A week later, Innes returned to seek Claire's help, this time for pain in his amputated arm. He explained that although he had lost the arm, He still felt pain, which he described as a phantom limb. Intrigued, Claire decided to consult Mr. Willoughby, who suggested traditional Chinese therapy. After a peculiar session where the Chinese man used pressure on certain points of Innes's body and explained that he had to scare his phantom limb with his own saliva, Innes's pain seemed to diminish. Innes, though grateful, was not convinced by Mr. Willoughby's unorthodox method and commented that he would prefer to try Claire's tea next time. Chapter 44. Jamie watched Fergus and Marzali with a melancholic air, lamenting his situation. After 20 years of longing to have Claire back, he now found himself trapped in a situation where, due to his own decisions, he had to share a cabin with Fergus, limiting his intimacy with Claire. He felt frustrated watching Fergus and Marzali cuddle while he constantly had to restrain himself. Claire tried to console him, reminding him that Marzali was still very young and that Jamie had tried to do the right thing by separating them until they could be properly married. However, Jamie continued to regret his decision, as he now found himself in an uncomfortable position, both emotionally and physically, with Fergus glaring at him resentfully whenever he showed affection towards Claire. The conversation grew more intimate when Jamie, in a moment of honesty, shared with Claire his experiences in prison. He recounted how he had learned to cope with the lack of intimacy and loneliness, especially at night when he was chained and had no privacy. Claire, moved by Jamie's latent need, felt her own desire intensify. The tension between them became palpable, but they were interrupted by the bell announcing the meal with the captain. The next day, while strolling on the deck, Claire and Jamie noticed Mr. Willoughby riding by the mainmast. Some sailors approached, trying to annoy the little Chinese man, but Jamie intervened, protecting him from a confrontation. Claire asked why Willoughby preferred to write in such an uncomfortable spot, and Jamie explained that he did it on purpose to irritate the crew, though the real reason for the sailors' hostility was more complex and related to Willoughby's exotic tastes regarding women's feet, which made him a strange and disliked figure among the others. The conversation was cut short when a cry from the galley caught their attention. Upon approaching, they discovered that a barrel full of rotten meat had been thrown overboard, attracting several sharks. The crew, excited by the prospect of catching one, lowered a boat to hunt them. Amid the excitement, Claire and Jamie were surprised to see Mr. Willoughby dive into the water after a pelican, and before they could react, Jamie also jumped into the water to save him. Both were hauled aboard, soaked but unharmed, while the sharks were captured. Jamie, shivering from cold and excitement, retreated to his cabin with Claire, where they finally gave into their passion. Later, they discovered that Mr. Willoughby had captured the pelican to teach it to fish for him. Over time, the bird became domesticated and became another member of the crew, earning both admiration and respect among the sailors. Though Mr. Willoughby remained an enigma to all, Claire noticed a certain melancholy in him, especially when, after writing for hours, he would let his pages be carried away by the wind into the sea without looking back. Chapter 45. As the weather grew warmer, the Artemis crew found moments of leisure at nightfall. Gathered in the forecastle, they sang, danced, and told stories to entertain themselves. One night, after most of the anecdotes had already been shared, Maitland, the ship's boy, turned his attention to Mr. Willoughby, asking why he had left his homeland, China. At first, the little Chinese man was reluctant, but finally agreed to tell his story, on the condition that Jamie act as a translator, as his command of English was not adequate for such a personal narrative. Jamie sat beside him, listening intently as Mr. Willoughby began to speak. The tale began with a description of his past life as a mandarin in Peking, the imperial city of the Son of Heaven. He explained that from a young age, he had shown great talent for writing, which led him to be noticed by Wu Xian, a mandarin of the imperial household, who took him in and supervised his education. Thanks to his skill, he quickly rose through the ranks, eventually receiving the red coral sphere to wear on his hat, a symbol of great honor. However, his good fortune changed when the emperor's second wife, Wan Mei, took notice of his poetry. This powerful woman, the mother of 4 sons, requested that Mr. Willoughby join her household, a request that was immediately granted. Though this was a great honor, it also came with a terrible sacrifice. To serve within the imperial household, he would have to become a eunuch, like all the servants of the royal wives. The crew listened in horror as they understood what this meant. Marzali, confused, asked what a eunuch was, but Fergus, protecting her, assured her she didn't need to worry. Mr. Willoughby, through Jamie, explained that although it was considered dishonorable to refuse a gift from the Emperor, he could not accept because he was deeply in love with all women, with their beauty and grace. Determined to avoid castration, he fled during the Night of the Lanterns, a great festival when the streets were filled with people. Disguised as a pilgrim, he made his way through the crowd and left his home, but soon realized he had forgotten a crucial detail: his long nails, a symbol of his status as a Mandarin. When he was discovered by a servant, he had to flee and hide in a ditch, where he cut off his nails to avoid being recognized. The story continued with his escape across the country, barely surviving, until he finally found a group of apothecaries who helped him reach the coast. There, he chose a ship whose sailors seemed the most barbaric, hoping they would take him as far away as possible. Thus, he arrived in Edinburgh. When Fergus questioned him, Mr. Willoughby admitted that he had no choice but to go into exile, as the Emperor had very long hands and would have caught him if he stayed in China. Despite his escape, he reflected on the ironies of his life. He had lost everything he valued by refusing to give up his manhood, including his honor, his livelihood, and his country. Now, in a place where he found no women worth loving, he lamented his decision. Sensing the tension among the crew, Jamie tried to lighten the mood, assuring them that anyone would have done the same in his place. However, Mr. Willoughby, absorbed in his memories and alcohol, seemed lost in deep melancholy. Finally, in a gesture of introspection, he grabbed his genitals, pondering aloud whether all he had sacrificed was truly worth it. Chapter 46. Marzali had been trying for days to muster the courage to talk to Claire. Although she didn't like her, she knew that Claire was the only woman on board and that, sooner or later, she would have to turn to her. Claire, aware of this, remained kind, waiting for Marzali to make the first move. Finally, Marzali appeared in Claire's cabin, determined to address her concern. With a firm tone, she began by saying that although she couldn't stand her, she acknowledged her wisdom and asked for an honest answer, even if Claire was a whore. Without losing her composure, Claire asked what she needed to know. Marzali, somewhat embarrassed, explained that her concern was how to avoid having children. Though she already knew how they were conceived, what she wanted to know was how to prevent it, especially because, although she might want children in the future, she couldn't afford them now for Fergus's sake. Claire, somewhat surprised, asked why she didn't want children at that moment, to which Marzali replied that she wanted to enjoy her intimacy with Fergus without worrying about unwanted pregnancies. The conversation turned into a discussion about sexuality, Marzali's fears based on her mother's religious upbringing, and the experiences she had observed in Voyager, who seemed to reject physical contact with Jamie. Marzali, intrigued, mentioned that she had seen Claire and Jamie together and noticed that, unlike her mother, Claire enjoyed being with Jamie. This led her to ask Claire to explain how she could avoid pregnancy, at least until she was ready. Claire explained that there were methods to prevent pregnancy, although they weren't always foolproof. She taught her how to use a sponge soaked in tansy oil or vinegar, a method that could help avoid conception if used correctly. However, before she could give more details, the conversation was interrupted by an alarm on the ship. When Claire went on deck, she discovered that the Artemis was being approached by a British ship, the Porpoise, a 74-gun frigate. As they drew closer, they realized it was not an attack, but a request for help. The young captain of the Porpoise, Thomas Leonard, boarded asking desperately for a surgeon, as his crew was being decimated by an epidemic. Claire, hearing the symptoms Leonard described, suspected it was typhoid fever, a highly contagious but not necessarily lethal disease if treated properly. Though Jamie was reluctant to let Claire board an infected ship, she insisted she had to fulfill her medical duty. Despite his objections, Claire boarded the Porpoise, promising to return to the Artemis in 2 hours. Once on the Porpoise, Claire confirmed her diagnosis of typhoid fever and began giving instructions to treat the sick. She ordered the sick to be moved to the deck, where fresh air could help them, and to be given boiled water to prevent dehydration. However, while working, she realized that the porpoise was quickly moving away from the Artemis. Furious, she confronted the young Captain Leonard, who confessed that he had decided to take her with them to continue caring for his crew, as he believed she was their only hope to save the rest of the men. Though Leonard expressed remorse for his lack of chivalry, he made it clear he had no other choice. Resigned, Claire agreed to help, though she still felt great anger at being kidnapped. While organizing efforts to control the epidemic, Claire learned that the porpoise carried the new governor of Jamaica on board, further complicating the situation. However, focused on her task, she continued taking the necessary measures to treat the sick and prevent the disease from spreading. Finally, while supervising the cleaning of the lower deck, Claire couldn't help but worry about Jamie and the information one of the porpoise sailors seemed to have about him. However, knowing that her priority was the sick, she decided to continue her work and postpone any confrontation with Captain Leonard until after she had stabilized the situation on board. Chapter 47. Claire had been on the porpoise for 2 days, but had not yet managed to speak with the young Captain Leonard. Despite her insistence, it seemed the captain was always busy or absent. During this time, Claire had become something of a leader among the crew, organizing efforts to combat the typhoid epidemic that continued to claim lives on the ship. She had managed to get 2 sailors skilled in distillation to build a still to produce pure alcohol, essential for disinfection, though this led to some sailors, desperate for the lack of rum, getting intoxicated by drinking the pure alcohol intended for sterilization. Claire had also found an ally in Anekji Johansson, the gunner's wife, a strong and intelligent woman who, despite the language barrier, quickly understood what Claire needed and tirelessly cared for the sick. However, the exhaustion and desperation began to take their toll on Claire. The situation on the ship remained critical, for men had died that day, and although the symptoms in the survivors began to subside, new cases continued to appear. Additionally, the source of the contagion remained a mystery, and until Claire discovered it, the spread of typhus would not stop. Tired of being ignored by Captain Leonard, Claire decided to confront him in his cabin. When she arrived, she found him asleep, exhausted by the responsibility weighing on his young shoulders. Although Claire initially felt compassion upon discovering that the captain was only 19 years old, an accidental knock woke him, and then Claire saw something in the ship's log that filled her with alarm. The name Fraser was written there. The captain's log revealed that he had received information from a sailor named Harry Tompkins, who had identified Jamie as a notorious smuggler and seditionist. Captain Leonard had decided not to pursue the Artemis at that time, but planned to arrest Jamie when they reunited to return Claire. The gravity of the situation filled Claire with anxiety, but she decided not to let anyone, not even the young captain, know what she had discovered. Days later, while overseeing the treatment of the sick, Claire decided she needed to know more about Harry Tompkins, the man who had betrayed Jamie. After discreetly questioning Elias Pound, she discovered that Tompkins had worked for customs under Sir Percival Turner, a man who had been accepting bribes from Jamie in exchange for allowing his illegal activities. Tompkins, it seemed, had been forcibly recruited in Edinburgh and had no choice but to serve on the porpoise. Finally, it was Tompkins who presented himself to Claire, gravely wounded in one leg. Claire recognized him immediately. He was the same man young Ian had thought he had killed at the Carfax clothes print shop. While treating his wound, Claire began to cautiously interrogate him, using a bone saw to intimidate him enough to make him talk. Tompkins revealed that he had been part of an operation to capture Jamie for sedition, orchestrated by Sir Percival, who had political ambitions and needed a spectacular arrest to gain prestige. However, unable to catch Jamie with contraband or obtain solid evidence of his seditious activities, they had devised a macabre plan, the murder of a customs officer, staged to look like the work of the smugglers, to justify Jamie's capture. Tompkins's confession left Claire horrified. The murder had been a trap, a deliberate act to frame Jamie and solidify the case against him. Despite her disdain for Tompkins, Claire managed to keep her composure and finish suturing his wound before sending him back to his hammock. When Tompkins stumbled away, almost drunk from the brandy Claire had given him, She was left alone, absorbing the magnitude of what she had discovered. Sir Percival's plan was ruthless, but Claire knew she had to stay strong and vigilant to save Jamie from falling into the hands of his enemies. Chapter 48. The days passed, and routine settled on the Porpoise, despite the difficult circumstances. Claire had spent 9 days battling the typhus epidemic without medication, facing the disease with nothing but persistence and a barrel of alcohol. The fight was exhausting, and although there were small victories, the number of dead continued to rise. She discovered that the source of the contagion was a cook's mate named Howard, but convincing the cook to isolate him from the rest was a hard task that required Captain Leonard's intervention. Though the culprit was finally isolated in the brig, the infection had already spread too much. One day, after an exhausting day, Claire witnessed a sunset that illuminated the sea as if the streets of paradise had opened before her. The moment deeply moved her, though reality quickly reasserted itself when she had to descend to the lower deck to continue attending to the sick. 4 days later, Claire suffered a loss that deeply affected her. Elias Pound, her young and brave assistant, quickly succumbed to typhoid fever. He died in her arms, calling her mother, which intensified her grief. After a brief funeral ceremony, Claire retreated to the deck, filled with sadness and frustration. Sitting beside a cannon, she let herself be carried away by anger and despair, pounding the railing repeatedly until an unfamiliar voice stopped her. The man who interrupted her was someone she had not seen before, a gentleman in fine, though worn, clothes who introduced himself as Lord John Grey. Despite his elegant appearance, there was something in his presence that indicated understanding and compassion. Lord John offered Claire a handkerchief, and upon hearing her tale of helplessness and sorrow, he tried to console her by saying he too knew the burden of having human lives in his hands, as a former army officer. Though Claire was too distraught to accept his words of comfort, Lord John's empathy provided her with a small respite amid the chaos. After a brief conversation in which they both acknowledged the inevitable powerlessness in the face of death, Lord John politely took his leave. Before leaving, he was addressed by a sailor who called him "my lord," revealing that he was the new governor of Jamaica, something that surprised Claire. As she reflected on her encounter with Lord John, Claire felt a momentary relief, a kind of grace that helped her cope with the pain of the losses she had suffered. She silently thanked him for that moment of peace amid the storm before descending once more to the lower deck to continue fighting the disease. Chapter 49. Claire began to notice something different in the air as she was near the goat pen on the Porpoise. Anekji Johansson, the woman in charge of the goats, confirmed that they were close to land. Wattling's Island, or San Salvador, was in sight, and the ship was preparing to anchor and resupply with water. However, Claire had other plans in mind. She knew that if she reached Jamaica, she would be used as bait to capture Jamie, and she needed to escape before it was too late. With Anekji's help, Claire devised a plan to get ashore. While Anekji distracted a sentry with the excuse that the goat needed to graze on land, Claire prepared to slip away. However, just as she was about to jump, she was intercepted by Captain Leonard, who unknowingly thwarted her intentions. Leonard, unaware of her true intentions, congratulated her on her assistance during the voyage and confessed that he knew who she really was, warning her that her husband would be captured and hanged as soon as they reached Jamaica. Desperate, Claire was forced to abandon her escape plan. Days later, an unexpected gust of wind damaged the mainmast of the Porpoise, forcing the ship to stop on the coast of one of the Caicos Islands for repairs. Though they were allowed to disembark, Claire knew she wouldn't survive on that arid island without water or food. However, Anekji didn't give up and proposed another plan. She explained to Claire that in the Muchwire Channel, near Hispaniola, the water currents could carry her to shore if she jumped into the sea. Though the plan seemed crazy, Claire knew it was her best chance to escape the Porpoise and prevent Jamie from being captured. Chapter 50. Claire swam exhausted in the warm Caribbean Sea, using a pair of barrels as an improvised lifebuoy. After hours of effort, the coast of Haiti was getting closer, but she still had a long way to go. Tied to the barrels, she tried to rest a little, but the strong current and thirst kept her on edge. Finally, Claire reached the shore, finding herself in a dense mangrove. Barefoot and with her skirts hiked up, she began to walk through the muddy roots, desperately searching for fresh water and a path that would lead her to solid ground. The scorching sun brought her relief at first, but soon the heat became unbearable and the thirst began to torment her. As she struggled to move forward, she was startled by a strange bird that made a noise similar to a cannon, reminding her of how vulnerable she was in this unfamiliar environment. As she ventured further into the mangrove, a tropical storm broke out, and the waves began to pound fiercely. Claire barely had time to climb a tree before a wave knocked her down, forcing her to cling to the trunk, praying for her life. At dawn, Claire woke up weakened, but at least the storm had passed. However, her thirst was becoming more intense. As she rested in the mud, she observed with fascination some strange fish moving out of the water when suddenly, a human voice surprised her. In front of her stood a burly man with curly black hair and a friendly, though wary, face. He introduced himself as Lawrence Stern, a German naturalist. Stern, surprised to find an Englishwoman in such a place, offered her water and, upon hearing her story, offered to take her to a nearby English friend's house. Weak and hungry, Claire gratefully accepted. The Fuente Hacienda turned out to be a dilapidated building inhabited by the eccentric Father Fogden and a small woman Claire mentally nicknamed Mamacita, who showed her not the slightest hospitality. Despite the strange atmosphere, Claire was able to enjoy a simple but satisfying meal and the somewhat peculiar company of Father Fogden, who talked to his dog Ludo and a coconut he called Coco. During the conversation, Stern mentioned having met Jamie Fraser in Edinburgh, which surprised Claire. Though she still distrusted this place and its inhabitants a bit, the mention of Jamie filled her with hope. After the meal, Fogden led her to a small courtyard where she could wash and change, though Mamacita didn't miss the opportunity to insult her in her language. The next day, after a quick breakfast, Stern and Claire prepared to head to San Luis. Before leaving, Claire asked Father Fogden about a ship he had mentioned, fearing it was the Porpoise. To her relief, it wasn't the Porpoise but a ship stranded on the beach, whose captain had a hook for a hand. Guided by Fogden, they reached a hill from which Claire could see the ship stranded in the sand. As they got closer, Claire recognized the Artemis and saw Fergus, Marzali, and Murphy among the crew. Excited, she ran towards them, but her joy faded when, upon asking about Jamie, she discovered that no one knew where he was. Chapter 51. Jamie Fraser found himself on a desperate mission. He had managed to board the Marsopa with the intent of rescuing Claire, who had been kidnapped and taken aboard the ship. Though he made it to the 'tween deck undetected, the search for Claire became increasingly distressing. Despite detailed descriptions from the Artemis about the Marsopa structure, finding Claire in the ship's maze was no easy task. The foul air and the fear of the unknown only heightened his anxiety. Hours later, exhausted and frustrated, Jamie began to fear the worst. He was on the verge of giving up when suddenly, a familiar smell of goats suggested he was close to something or someone connected to Claire. Following the scent, he encountered a one-eyed sailor, Harry Tompkins, who reacted with surprise upon seeing Jamie. Though Tompkins tried to flee, Jamie quickly captured him, demanding to know his wife's whereabouts. Initially terrified, Tompkins reluctantly confessed that Claire had fallen overboard and mockingly implied that Jamie would soon join her in hell, being captured and hanged in Kingston. The revelation of Claire's supposed death left Jamie devastated, unable to process the thought that his wife might be dead. However, before he could react, Jamie was attacked from behind and lost consciousness. He woke up in an unfamiliar place, surrounded by children speaking Creole French. Although disoriented at first, he soon began to recall recent events, the sailor who had struck him, his confrontation with Captain Leonard, and the agony of believing Claire was dead. However, his last memory was of a woman's voice assuring him that Claire was not dead and that he must find her. The children led him to a nearby stream where he could refresh himself and drink water. Realizing he was in Cap Haitian, Jamie began piecing together his situation. When the children mentioned a ship called Bruja that had set sail for Bridgetown, a flicker of hope surged within him. Perhaps Claire had survived, and with some luck, he might also reunite with his nephew Ian. With renewed determination, Jamie followed the children to a nearby tavern, hoping to find more clues about Claire and his next steps. Chapter 52. After several days of anguish and repairs, Claire watched as the Artemis regained its upright position, ready to set sail. But the calm was disrupted by the arrival of a group of French soldiers, prompting Fergus and Marzali to hide in the jungle alongside Claire. However, the tension eased when they discovered that the leader of the soldiers was Jamie, who, under the alias Captain Alessandro, had infiltrated the group to assist with the ship's repairs. While Jamie organized the soldiers to help with the repairs, Claire and Marzali remained hidden, observing as the sailors of the Artemis resumed their work, though now with one eye on the French. Jamie managed to have the soldiers disarmed and locked up in the hold without resorting to violence. Once the Artemis was secured, Fergus, full of excitement, ran to inform Marzali and Claire of their success. Claire boarded the Artemis and found Jamie, who, with a grown beard and infested with lice, was preparing to take a bath. Amid jokes and caresses, they discussed how Jamie had gotten there and what his plans were going forward. Suddenly, Marzali burst in, reminding Jamie of his promise to marry her to Fergus as soon as they reached the Antilles. Although Jamie tried to postpone the wedding, Marzali insisted, and Claire suggested using one of the late Ermenegilda's dresses, a possession of Father Fogden, for the ceremony. As night fell, the group gathered on the beach for the wedding. The somewhat drunken and erratic Father Fogden officiated the ceremony, during which Fergus was named Fergus Claudel Fraser by Jamie, giving him a surname and solidifying his place in the family. The ceremony was chaotic but emotional, with Marzali and Fergus finally married under the priest's blessing. Afterwards, Claire and Jamie, moved by the wedding, confessed their love to each other once more as the sailors celebrated with cheers under the Caribbean night. Part 9. Unknown Worlds. Chapter 53. The Artemis was loaded with 10 tons of bat guano, a highly valued fertilizer that emitted an unbearable stench. Jamie and Claire watched as the slaves pushed wheelbarrows filled with blocks of dried guano, while Jamie remarked that Fergus, now a partner in the venture, had secured this lucrative contract with a certain Mr. Gray in Jamaica. Fergus, overseeing the operation, was determined to provide for his new wife, Marzali, who, though staying close by, tried to avoid the foul odor by covering her face with a cloth. Jamie and Claire, on the other hand, discussed the letter Marzali had written to her mother, Voyager, and the possible reaction she might have upon learning about the marriage to Fergus and the strange circumstances surrounding it. As this was happening, Jamie received a visit from a colonist who informed him that a few days ago, a man named Villiers had purchased 6 slaves from the captain of the Bruja, but Ian was not among them. Jamie deduced that the Bruja must have passed through another port before reaching Barbados, possibly Jamaica. They decided that their next destination would be Jamaica, both to continue the search for Ian and to rid themselves of the foul-smelling cargo. Recalling the visit to the slave market in Bridgetown, Claire remembered the horrific experience she had there. During the visit, she witnessed atrocious scenes that led her to a fit of rage, ending with the impulsive purchase of a one-armed slave named Temeraire. This experience left her horrified and with a deep sense of guilt. Back in the present, as the Artemis pulled away from the dock, Claire and Jamie caught a whiff of a pungent smell coming from a bonfire where the bodies of slaves who didn't survive the journey from Africa were being burned. Upon learning this, they decided to return to the site, fearing they might find Ian's body among the dead. Jamie immersed himself in the grim task of sorting through the piled-up corpses on the pyre, leaving him physically and emotionally devastated. Finally, Jamie emerged from the smoke, dirty and shaken, but confirming in a hoarse voice that Ian was not among the dead. Chapter 54. In the cabin of the Artemis, Claire and Jamie discussed what to do with Temeraire, the slave Claire had impulsively purchased at the market. Claire felt deeply uncomfortable with the idea of owning a person, while Jamie considered the limited options for ensuring him a decent life. Their conversation was abruptly interrupted when the ship was attacked by pirates, unleashing chaos. Jamie instructed Claire and Marzali to hide in the aft hold, where the blocks of guano were stored. The two women plunged into the darkness, but their refuge did not offer safety for long. Terrified, Marzali attempted to escape and was captured by a burly, tattooed pirate. Acting quickly and bravely, Claire wounded him with an amputation knife, allowing Marzali to escape. However, the pirate chased Claire, who managed to avoid serious injury thanks to the intervention of Ping and Willoughby's goose, who knocked down the pirate at the last moment. After the battle, Claire, exhausted and wounded, reunited with Jamie, who was clearly concerned about her condition. They discovered that Claire had suffered a deep wound on her arm during the fight, and Jamie, along with Willoughby, took care of stitching her up without adequate anesthesia, a painful process that Claire endured with remarkable bravery. With the situation stabilized, Jamie and Claire reflected on the pirate attack. Jamie suspected that the pirate ship might be the Bruja, the vessel they were searching for due to its connection to Ian. Fergus and Maitland found a pirate's body wearing a necklace composed of a mix of valuable objects, which reinforced Jamie's theory. Later, in the intimacy of the cabin, Claire and Jamie shared a moment of vulnerability. Still troubled by memories of the Battle of Culloden, Jamie revealed his doubts and guilt over surviving while so many others, including his godfather Murta, died. Claire comforted him, reminding him that some questions have no answers. The conversation faded into the night, leaving Jamie in restless sleep and Claire pondering life and death in a world full of uncertainty. Chapter 55. Claire wakes up feeling sick, with a fever and a severe headache. As she tries to recover, Jamie looks for her medicine box to treat a cut on his head that he accidentally suffered. During their conversation, Jamie mentions that they have captured a prisoner from the pirate ship Bruja, a man who appears to be a runaway slave. Although wounded and mistreated, the dark-skinned and strong-looking prisoner does not appear submissive. Jamie and Claire attempt to speak with the prisoner in various languages, but at first, he remains silent and distrustful. Eventually, he introduces himself as Ishmael and reveals that he was captured while fishing in a river, not as a pirate but as a slave. Jamie carefully questions him about the Bruja's crew, seeking information about Ian. Ishmael describes a group of boys on board, some of whom match Ian's description. As Jamie continues questioning Ishmael, Claire, weakened by fever, notices an important detail, a scar on Ishmael's back that suggests he was branded by a slaver. She remembers that the slave they bought in Barbados, Temeraire, had a similar mark, leading her to suspect that both may have belonged to the same person, a certain Mrs. Abernathy in Jamaica. Convinced they have found a crucial clue, Claire asks Fergus to observe Temeraire's reaction upon seeing Ishmael, to confirm if they are indeed from the same place. However, her exhaustion and blood loss force her back to bed, where Jamie cares for her and promises to help her rest with a cup of whiskey. Chapter 56. Claire wakes up late in the afternoon, feeling extremely feverish and in pain, especially in her injured arm. Realizing she needs penicillin to treat the infection, she decides to give herself an injection. However, due to her weakness, she asks Jamie to do it, and despite his doubts, he ends up helping her with the injection. As Claire rests, Jamie opens a porthole to freshen the cabin, and they begin talking about their future once they have rescued Ian. Jamie, aware that they cannot return to Scotland due to the circumstances, considers their options, including the American colonies. Claire reassures him that they could be safe in the colonies, and Jamie starts contemplating the possibility of settling there. After a heartfelt conversation about their fears and concerns, Jamie leans in to kiss Claire, who finally falls asleep. Hours later, Jamie brings her some turtle soup that Murphy has specially prepared for her. Claire, still weak but feeling slightly better, enjoys the meal while Jamie tells her that they have settled Ishmael on the aft deck, under Fergus's watch. The conversation between Claire and Jamie soon turns into playful flirting, despite Claire's medical condition. The atmosphere becomes intimate, and amid jokes and affectionate gestures, they end up in a passionate scene in the small cabin. Despite an interruption from Lawrence Stern, the couple continues, indulging in a moment of passion that momentarily eases all their worries. Finally, Jamie settles Claire into bed, checks her fever, which has subsided, and ensures she is comfortable before leaving the cabin, letting her rest after the exhausting and feverish day. Chapter 57. As the Artemis sails towards Jared's plantation in Jamaica, Jamie watches with concern as the warship Porpoise enters Kingston Harbor. Although Claire tries to reassure him, Jamie cannot shake the feeling that the ship is pursuing him, recalling how the Porpoise appeared several times during their journey. Claire explains that the ship is there to bring the colony's new governor, a man named John Gray, who, to Claire's surprise, turns out to be an old friend of Jamie's. As they approach their destination, Ishmael, the runaway slave they have been guarding, announces that he wishes to disembark on a nearby island. Despite his doubts, Jamie keeps his promise and allows Ishmael to take Temeraire, another recently freed slave, with him. With words in an unknown language, Ishmael convinces Temeraire to follow him, and they both leave, presumably to join a group of Maroons living in the mountains. The group arrives at Jared's plantation, known as Blue Mountain House, where they are welcomed by the McIvers, a Scottish couple managing the property. Claire enjoys a long, relaxing bath, a delight after weeks of travel and exhaustion. Later, she and Jamie reunite in bed, savoring an intimate moment that had been hard to find during the journey. During dinner, Jamie and Claire ask the McIvers about the mysterious Mrs. Abernathy of Rose Hall. The conversation reveals that Mrs. Abernathy, an enigmatic woman living alone in the mountains, is the subject of many rumors, including one that she poisoned her husband. Additionally, Mrs. McIver mentions that Reverend Campbell, whom Claire had previously met in Edinburgh, was planning to visit Mrs. Abernathy, but has been delayed by the disappearance of his sister, Margaret Jane. Margaret Jane's disappearance is a mystery that has shocked the island, and it is suggested that Reverend Campbell should take advantage of an upcoming reception at the governor's residence to ask for help. Jamie, intrigued, decides that he and Claire will attend the reception, not only to investigate Margaret Jane's disappearance, but also to gather more information about Ian's whereabouts. Although Claire expresses concern about not having a suitable dress for the occasion, Mrs. McIver assures her that her seamstress will take care of it. Jamie, with an enigmatic smile, promises Claire that everything will be fine and that he has a plan in mind to find Ian. Chapter 58. Jamie prepares for the grand reception at the Jamaican governor's mansion. His transformation is astonishing. With a white wig, a luxurious gray suit, red-heeled shoes, and a lace shirt, he manages to disguise his identity as a Scottish smuggler. However, Jamie's height remains an impossible challenge to conceal, prompting Claire to joke that he looks like a gargoyle, to which Fergus replies that he looks more like a Frenchman. Claire is also impressively dressed, wearing a violet silk gown adorned with a black coral brooch that Jamie gave her. Although they are aware of the potential danger posed by the presence of people from the Porpoise, Jamie is confident that their disguise will protect them. They have even brought Mr. Willoughby, who promises to behave despite the alcoholic temptations at the party. Upon arriving at the governor's mansion, Claire and Jamie find themselves among an elegant and lively crowd. Claire is surprised to recognize the governor as Lord John Gray, an old acquaintance of Jamie's. John's reaction upon seeing Claire is intense, revealing that he did not expect to meet her. As the party unfolds, Claire tries to gather information about the Abernathy's, particularly the mysterious Mrs. Abernathy of Rose Hall. The ladies present, always eager to share gossip, confirm the dark rumors surrounding the widow Abernathy, suggesting she may have been involved in her husband's death. During the party, Claire encounters Reverend Archibald Campbell, who seems desperate over his sister's disappearance. During their conversation, the Reverend mentions Jamie, revealing a deep hatred towards him, whom he blames for his sister's mental state. Later, Claire witnesses a scene that leaves her stunned. Jamie, in a moment of apparent emotion, embraces Lord John Gray in the governor's private office. The intensity of their relationship and the expression on Lord John's face as he looks at Jamie leave Claire confused and full of doubts. However, before confronting Jamie, she decides to escape the situation and heads to the ladies' room. There, Claire encounters an even greater horror. Mina Alcott, one of the guests, lies dead on a divan, with a cut on her neck and a pool of blood around her head. As Claire tries to process what she sees, The door opens and other women enter, screaming upon discovering the scene. Claire watches in horror as bloody footprints lead towards the window, indicating that the killer has just escaped. Chapter 59. Jamie has been arrested following the murder at the governor's mansion, and Claire, along with Marzali, is left waiting for news in the governor's office. Marzali, worried, refuses to believe that Jamie or Mr. Willoughby is involved in the crime. Claire, though also doubting their guilt, is visibly shaken and questions whether she truly knows Jamie. After a long wait, Fergus arrives and informs Claire that she can go home, but she decides to wait for Jamie. Finally, the governor, Lord John Grey, enters the office. Despite the situation, Lord John seems more interested in talking about Jamie and the history that binds them than about the murder. During their conversation, Lord John reveals that Jamie has a son named Willie, born from his relationship with Geneva Dunsany, the sister of Lord John's wife. Claire is shocked to see the miniature portrait of Willie, who bears a striking resemblance to Jamie, and learns more about Jamie's sacrifice and feelings in leaving his son in Lord John's care. Jamie had even offered his body to Lord John as a token of gratitude, but he declined, valuing their friendship more. After this revelation, Claire feels confused and emotionally stirred, not only by the news of Jamie's son, but also by the complex relationship Jamie has with Lord John. However, she realizes that, despite everything, Jamie has been faithful to her in spirit and love. Finally, Jamie is released and reunited with Claire. During their journey back, Jamie confesses his fear that he may have caused the woman's death, though he cannot remember what happened clearly due to the effects of alcohol. He also reveals the truth about Willie, his son, and expresses his fear of having failed her by not confiding in her about this secret from the start. Claire, touched by his honesty and the weight of his confession, reaffirms her commitment and love for him, reminding him that he is no longer alone. The two renew their bond of love and loyalty, promising each other to stay together until the end of their days. In a symbolic gesture, they repeat their marriage vows, strengthening the union that has kept them together despite the challenges and secrets. Chapter 60. Rose Hall, Gillis Duncan's plantation, was located high in the mountains, surrounded by the dense jungle of Jamaica. Jamie and Claire traveled there in hopes of finding Ian, who had disappeared in Kingston. As they ventured deeper into the plantation, they observed the large two-story house, surrounded by coffee and sugarcane fields. Upon their arrival, they were greeted by Gillis Duncan, a figure they both believed to be long dead. The encounter was shocking, especially for Claire, who recognized Gillis and was astonished to see her alive and in a position of power in the West Indies. Gillis, now calling herself Mrs. Abernathy, invited them inside and, despite the tension, welcomed them kindly, serving tea as they reminisced about their past encounters in Scotland. Gillis explained that she had survived her witchcraft trial in Cranesmere thanks to Dougal Mackenzie, who helped her escape. She revealed how she had used her pregnancy to manipulate Dougal and save her life. She then shared with Claire some details about magic and time travel, suggesting that gemstones could offer protection during time journeys. Meanwhile, Jamie, concerned for Ian's safety, tried to ascertain if the young man was on the plantation. He accepted Gillis's offer to inspect the sugar press, using it as an excuse to explore the property. Claire, on the other hand, examined some 6 slaves on the plantation, including one suffering from a loa worm and another who had already died. During his exploration, Jamie noticed a trapdoor in the floor guarded by Hercules, a giant and seemingly unfeeling slave, which led him to suspect that Ian might be imprisoned there. Claire also tried to gather information from the enslaved women, but to no avail. However, Gillis discovered and showed a particular interest in photographs of Brianna, Claire's daughter, which deeply unsettled both of them. As they left the plantation, Jamie and Claire discussed the possibility that Ian was in a basement under Hercules' watch. Jamie decided that they would need help to rescue him, planning to return with men and weapons in a few days. Although Claire insisted on accompanying him, Jamie expressed concern for her safety, but eventually agreed to her desire to participate. The threat posed by Gillis, her strange interest in Brianna, and their determination to rescue Ian plunged the couple into an atmosphere of urgency and danger as they prepared to face the challenges awaiting them at Rose Hall. Chapter 61. Jamie, Claire, and a group of allies sailed upriver on a boat, intending to rescue Ian from the sinister Gillis Duncan. Among the passengers was Lawrence Stern, who revealed that he had met Gillis at her plantation. Initially charmed by her, he soon began to understand her true nature. Upon reaching their destination, Claire was left on the shore while the men headed to the refinery. However, unease drove her to disobey orders and venture into the plantation. Upon arriving at the house, Claire found Reverend Archibald Campbell, who informed her that Gillis had vanished, leaving the house empty. Their conversation was interrupted by the unexpected appearance of Mr. Willoughby, who accused Campbell of being a murderer. In a violent confrontation, Willoughby, whose real name is Etienne Cho, revealed that he had betrayed Jamie in Edinburgh but was now seeking redemption. Amid the chaos, Campbell attempted to attack Claire, but Etienne Cho killed him, leaving Claire in shock. In the midst of the confusion, Claire went up to Gillis' laboratory, where she found a photograph of her daughter Brianna with the edges burned, filling her with terror. She realized that Gillis planned to use Brianna in some way in her dark rituals. Desperate, Claire tried to reunite with Jamie, but was captured by the plantation slaves. Taken to a hut, Claire witnessed a terrifying ritual led by Ishmael, a slave and Houngan. Wearing a crocodile head, Ishmael presided over a macabre spectacle in which Margaret Campbell, possessed by various entities, answered the slaves' questions in a deep trance. Among the many spirits that possessed her, Brianna's voice emerged in a terrifying manner, warning Jamie and Claire. Despite the fear, Claire was rescued by Jamie, but both were deeply disturbed by what they had witnessed. Finally, Ishmael revealed that Gillis had taken Ian to a place called a Banda, a cave in Hispaniola known for its magical power. Ishmael warned that following her meant certain death, but Jamie, determined to save his nephew, was undeterred. As Claire and Jamie returned, they saw several plantations on the island burning, a symbol of the chaos that was about to unfold. As Margaret Campbell left with the slaves, Jamie tried to stop her, but Claire convinced him to let her go. Resigned yet determined, Claire and Jamie prepared for their next step, finding Gillis and saving Ian before it was too late. Chapter 62. Jamie and Claire prepared to set out for a Banda on Governor John Grey's pinnace. Jamie insisted they would steal a ship to avoid implicating Grey in any legal complications. Despite Grey's insistence on keeping Claire under his protection, Jamie explained there was no choice but to take her along. At dusk, they set sail for Hispaniola, accompanied by Lawrence Stern. During the journey, Claire couldn't help but reflect on the nature of supernatural phenomena, and the conversation veered towards the strange experiences Stern had witnessed in the past. As they neared Hispaniola, a sense of uncertainty and fear overcame Claire. Once on the island, Jamie and Claire ventured into the jungle to search for Gillis and Ian, leaving the smugglers and Lawrence on the boat. After a strenuous trek, they reached a stone circle similar to Cray Na Dun, which greatly unsettled Claire. As they advanced, Claire began to feel a disturbing presence, convinced that Gillis was nearby. Guided by Claire, they found a cave emanating a dark, palpable energy. Hand in hand, Jamie and Claire entered the cave, cautiously moving forward in the complete darkness. The air was thick with almost unbearable tension, and Claire sensed Gillis' presence, knowing she was aware of their arrival. At the end of the tunnel, they found Gillis performing a ritual around Ian, who was bound and gagged in the center of a pentagon drawn on the ground with diamond dust and mercury. Gillis, armed with pistols, warned them not to come any closer while she completed the ritual. Jamie tried to reason with her, but Gillis was determined to achieve her goal, sacrificing Ian to travel through time and meet Brianna, whom she believed to be the last of the Lovat line. In a desperate act, Jamie lunged at Gillis, but she fired, wounding him in the head. Claire, filled with fury and without fear, rushed at Gillis, taking her by surprise and decapitating her with a ceremonial axe. With Gillis' death, The hum in the cave ceased, leaving Claire and Jamie exhausted and dazed. They managed to free Ian and, supporting each other, escape the cave as a storm raged outside. Lawrence, who had been waiting for them at the entrance, greeted them with relief, and together they made their way back to the coast. At the camp, Claire treated Jamie's wound, which fortunately was not fatal. Meanwhile, Ian, still shaken by what had happened, recounted the details of his captivity under Gillis to Jamie. Despite everything, Jamie tried to comfort his nephew, assuring him that they would soon be back at Lallybroch. That night, as they rested in the jungle, Claire and Jamie discussed their next steps. Jamie decided that they wouldn't return to Jamaica but would head to Eleuthera, where they could reunite with Fergus and Marzali in a safe place. With that plan in mind, Jamie prepared to rest, holding onto the jacket that contained the portraits of his children, while Claire kept watch, lost in thought. Chapter 63. At dawn, after a restful sleep, Claire, Jamie, Ian, and Lawrence resumed their march to the coast. However, what they found filled them with surprise and fear. The pirate ship, the Bruja, was stranded on the beach of Hispaniola. But it wasn't pirates who manned it, but runaway slaves who had attempted to escape on it. Seeing a gunboat approaching, they scattered in panic, some seeking refuge in the jungle while others tried to unload the ship. With no time to lose, Jamie led his group to the shore, where Governor Gray's pinnace, with Jamie's trusted men aboard, awaited them. They hurriedly boarded the vessel as the gunboat began firing, both at the Bruja and the slaves fleeing on the beach. The violence of the attack was devastating, with bodies flying through the air and the sand turning red. Jamie, Claire, and the others managed to escape aboard the pinnace, but the gunboat, the Marsopa, soon began chasing them. Throughout the day, the pinnace tried to maintain its distance, but the gunboat dangerously closed in. As night fell, Jamie decided to turn towards the open sea, hoping to lose their pursuers in the darkness. However, at dawn, the Marsopa was still on their tail. As the wind picked up, the sea conditions worsened, and the pinnace began to struggle against increasingly higher waves. Despite the crew's efforts, the gunboat continued to gain ground until a storm hit. In the midst of the storm, the Marsopa suffered severe damage. Its mainmast broke, and, caught by the waves, it capsized, quickly sinking along with its crew. The storm continued to rage, and the survivors on the pinnace found themselves in a desperate struggle to stay alive. Claire, swept away by a massive wave, was thrown into the sea, and Jamie had to fight to keep her afloat, clinging to a piece of wood. Despite the chaos, Jamie never let go, staying by her side as the waves relentlessly battered them. After what seemed an eternity, Claire lost consciousness, engulfed in a sense of peace and surrender. But Jamie, with fierce determination, managed to keep her alive until they finally reached land. They were rescued by local men who took them to safety. When Claire awoke, she found herself in a bed inside a large, unfamiliar house. Jamie, visibly exhausted but relieved, explained that they had been washed ashore, where they were found by the inhabitants of the house, though he didn't know exactly where they were. After the arrival of their hostess, Mrs. Patsy Olivier, the couple discovered, to their amazement, that they had arrived in America, in the colony of Georgia, after being blown nearly 1,000 kilometers off course by the storm. Finally, Jamie introduced himself to their hostess as Jamie Fraser and presented Claire as his wife, feeling a sense of relief and hope knowing they had reached the new world, a place where they could start anew and find freedom. Thank you for joining us on this literary journey. If you enjoyed this summary of Voyager, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more literary adventures. Give it a like and share the video with other Outlander fans. What part of this installment surprised you the most? What do you think will happen in the next books? Leave your answers in the comments. We'd love to hear your thoughts.